channel 1 in just a minute, just a second. Everyone should get a pop-up notification. Click got it, and that will go away. And in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, you'll see that we're live on YouTube. If you hover over the word YouTube, there's a drop down and you can get the link to the streaming channel. So you can share it with your family and friends. And I will come back to this. I'm going to go set up Nick's, but I'll be in and out of the Zoom session to take screenshots today. And if you have any questions, do put it in the chat. All right, thanks.
Thank you so much, Naomi.
Oh, I need to give you back hosting. Hold on.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Hi, Carrie. Hi, Ben.
Hey.
Hello.
How are you doing, Ben?
Yeah, good.
I don't know, students, I don't know if you, have you all met Ben before, Professor Smith?
I don't think so. Maybe in some reviews.
Well, he should seem familiar to you all because everyone went to the lecture series, right? This semester, right?
Hopefully. Well, hopefully I'll get a chance to meet all of you in a course of some sort in the future.
Back in the day, Ben and I used to co-teach the digital media class.
Yeah, that was a great way for us to meet. That was the first we really work together, obviously, in any real capacity. So super fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I love seeing the work too. So I always enthusiastically refresh my Instagram feeds, you know, when I know that new work is being put out. And
That's great. All right. Well, I think we can kind of get started. I think we have most students here. Claire, or maybe not Claire, maybe Joey, do you mind just in your group chat, just letting everyone know they should be here? Thank you so much.
I can do that.
Thank you, Joey. All right. Okay, so I have two screens, but I'll be looking here. But if I'm doing something weird, that's because I have two screens. All right, so welcome everyone. Just a quick note, we're live on YouTube, which is so exciting. Whatever that means. Okay, so I wanted to welcome everyone. And before we get started,
it's going to be a ratings juggernaut for you, Nanette.
I know.
Netflix is going to reach out to you after this, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm working on some funny material here that I'm going to try to weave in seamlessly into my introduction. So we'll see how these jokes land.
Cool.
Students are required to unmute to laugh into the mics after every joke. All right, so Carrie did Professor Norman did a wonderful job kind of introducing the project and everything we've been working on. So before we get started, did any of the reviewers, or maybe hopefully the students don't have questions about the project, but did any of the reviewers have any other kind of questions before we get started? We're good? Okay, great. Okay, so we're gonna get started with some reviewer kind of critic introductions. And so I was able to kind of send all of your very kind of your bios to the students. So in the interest of time, I'm going to give a very kind of brief introduction, but we all know that it would take us forever if we went through every single accolade that you all have kind of had. So we're going to do it very quickly, but they are very familiar with your accomplishments and your work, and they're all very excited that everyone is here to join. So first we have Professor Troy Sham joining as our kind of outside critic. He's the Associate Professor and Director of Totalization Program at Rice University, and is also the co-founder of Sham Shea. And so the incredible work of their firm ranges from kind of built projects across the country, and they also have a lot of kind of speculative work that questions art and form in the city. So the students are very kind of familiar with the work and the work of your firm. I told the students that Troy was my professor while I was at Rice. And so that makes him, students, your grand professor. I think that's how that works.
I like that.
Yeah. I here I have.
You know where to
paused-
come to if you have a problem with your education in the end. You can call me up and say, wait a second, Nimet
Yeah.
got something wrong. Yeah.
Which leads me to my next point, where Troy is a great educator and informed a lot of my own kind of interests early in my kind of academic kind of career and educational career. So he's to blame for any qualms you may have.
It's so cool to be at Tulane. I'm, we're kind of neighbors, but we don't really see each other that much. So I'm so excited to see the work and excited not only to have the invitation from the Met, but also from the school. So I'm excited to see what we have today.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. Very exciting. And then next we have Ben Smith. He's an assistant professor here at Tulane. He's a very accomplished scholar, educator, and designer. He's previously worked at Morphosis and has taught at SciArc and University of Michigan before joining Tulane here in New Orleans. And so I would say, students, if you ever have kind of questions about color and how to use it beautifully, just go to Ben's website and he has all the answers for you. So welcome, Ben.
Thanks. Didn't know I was a color expert.
I think you are. I think you
I
are.
appreciate that.
That's your unofficial title.
Cool.
So scholar, educator, designer, color expert.
Perfect.
And then finally, so welcome, Ben.
Thank you.
Finally, we have Professor Carrie Norman. You all know her as our coordinator of our studio. She's also an assistant professor here at Tulane and is the co-founder of Norman Kelly. So you all know that the firm is based in New Orleans and in Chicago. I'm coming from Chicago, so I was actually very familiar and a big fan of their work. And I was actually able to see their Master in Form installation at the Graham Foundation when I was in Chicago. So I've always admired their work from afar in Chicago, and I never kind of expected to be so lucky to be able to work with Carrie in this kind of capacity. So we're so happy that you're here, Carrie, and thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. And to Troy, we're excited to have you, and we'd love to make kind of stronger links and ties with you as our neighbor, with Rice.
I think the last time I saw you was in line for coffee at the Ace Hotel in New York or something.
That's right.
Yeah, which is seems like an eon ago with COVID.
It was.
But yeah. So yeah, cool. Hopefully we get to
Good
see you
to
again.
see you.
Yeah.
Great. All right. So really quickly, just a little bit about kind of today's review. The students will be sharing their screens, and so I'll kind of hand it over to them. I'm going to drop in the concept board link in the chat here in case you all are interested in kind of taking a look at the other sections as well. And kind of at the end of the kind of review, we're going to set aside some time for the students to lead a discussion with the reviewers. And so they've all kind of come prepared with questions for you all. I have a really good question, which I've already shared with them that they're not allowed to steal, but it's going to be what your favorite cookie is. So think about that, please. Hard-hitting questions here. So we're going to have about 15 minutes per student, and we'll kind of get started. But any questions before we get started? All right. Well, Claire, you're up.
Maybe one quick question, Nimet.
Yeah.
What do you think would be most useful for the students to get feedback with today? I mean, is there anything in particular you'd like us to focus on, or, and that'll probably become apparent throughout the talks, but if there's anything that you want us to really address, feel free to shoot me a note in the chat or something.
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. Thank you. I think the kind of intention of today is that the students will lead the discussion. And so they're going to be kind of leading what they're interested in. And I think it's a little bit different in terms of the feedback and insights they want. So I'm going to defer to the students, and it's kind of up to them to lead the discussion. I'm just here to eat snacks and watch kind of what they've done so far. So I'm going to leave it up to them. Okay. So that's a big non-answer for you, if that's all right.
I can roll with that.
Okay, great. All right, Claire, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Claire Fisher. I'm just going to share my presentation really quick. So I chose the Water's Edge site because it is primarily cleared and rich with a variety of remains from the past, such as the mine shaft and previous foundations of buildings. So today that area is pretty cleared, and I wanted to fill that space with my intervention to bring life back into that cleared area. The idea of void is what I utilized mostly in my project, which is referencing the mine. So I started thinking with the room and pillar mining method, which eventually took off into my design using the spirit of it, where I used the inverse of the method to create a system of voids that then become atriums. So as displayed in my diagrams, where spaces overlap, those are what become the voids. In addition, these voids guide my circulation. So to go into each new space, one must go through each of the voids. So my site analysis shows the extent of the site in which my intervention is based. The site plan highlights the orientation of the intervention on the water's edge and mine site. The site section gives a better understanding of how the intervention connects to the larger site.
Claire, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We were just seeing page 1 of your presentation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Maybe do you mind unsharing and resharing and seeing if that maybe helps?
Oh, shoot. Maybe it's because I have it in presentation mode. So maybe I just won't. Is that better?
Yeah, we see your, yeah.
You see my site section?
Yep.
Okay, should I go back?
Yeah, why don't you quickly kind of restart? Sorry about that.
That's okay. So I'll start again with the site analysis. Basically, that's just showing the extent of the site in which my intervention is based. And this was also based on the research that we did in the previous, like leading up to this assignment. Can you see this too? Okay.
Yep.
My site plan is highlighting the orientation of the intervention on the water's edge and mine site. And the site section gives a better understanding of how the intervention connects within the larger site. So my axon is showing where my intervention is situated onto the site. And as I've highlighted in my plans, to fully experience the spaces, one must go through each of these atriums and weave through each of the spaces. And each space provides a different lighting moment, such as in this center space where it's primarily glass and where natural light can stream in, as well as light wells provided by the atriums to provide a lot of natural light into the space. So to access the intervention from the first floor, one must go in and down on a series of ramps that hug the walls of the building. The intervention is placed into the ground on a platform of sorts that is open to above, while the inside spaces, one can look out onto the horizon from the second level, and from the exterior, one can look into the building at eye level. These high ceilings provide this feeling of being in like the mammoth galleries of salt, where I've broken up the spaces to create hierarchy at different levels. As shown in my section perspective, you can get a better idea of the hierarchy of spaces as well as more context into how the spaces operate. The voids provide a threshold to blur the barrier of what is considered outside and inside, where one has to experience a connection to nature to advance into the next space. My perspectives show my exploration with materiality and the feeling in the space in terms of what it feels like to inhabit them. So the exterior perspective provides detail of how the building would look within the site with more context. The ramp perspective provides a view of this descent into the building as the ramp hugs the side of the building. The interior perspective gives a better idea of what it would be like to be inside this center space, while highlighting what the void spaces would look like in conjunction with the spaces around it. And I've also included a drawing where you can look up at the ceiling to show how the voids happen from above. I've also included a site model at a 16th inch scale to highlight how the building sits within the site and along the path. So, and this is the interior with the roof off. and then a closer up view. And I've also included a 1/4-inch model that highlights the exhibition space with the addition of the void populated with trees and people to show the atmosphere of the space, as well as how light might filter into it. It's loading. Thank you so much.
I have a quick clarification question, Clara. That was like a great presentation, but I'm trying to understand the relationship. Like I see the voids in the plan, but then when they show up in the section and the other drawings, do they have an enclosure around them, or are they just, do the voids, are they just defined by the skylights? Could you explain a little bit how the void actually is materialized in your imagination of the building?
Yeah, so it's like encased in windows like glass.
Glass. Okay.
Yes.
I think it's a super sophisticated project, so I should be pretty happy with it. I think one of the things that is like really, to me, curious about, and I think you have all these different kinds of representation, so I'm just going to like offer like some more advice about how you might represent it. I think one of the key things about the project that it might just be at the stage where you're reflecting as well, is that this kind of like this kind of band of a giant retaining wall that makes the exterior perimeter of the project, and the flat roof that kind of like mimics that, creates this really amazing kind of lens to the landscape, this kind of like really special horizontal framing. And towards the end of the presentation, you start showing us views of the project. And I really wish there were views that explored the way in which that like framing of the landscape happens in this, I can't find my annotation, but in this space at the edge, that you can see in the section, or that shows up in the drawings, in this space between the soffit of the roof and the top of the retaining wall, because it really is, as you move down on those ramps, I guess, for instance, your views show us like the actual ramp itself. And I know that like why you're making this cool building, you want to show us the building. But what I think for me, more interesting is the way in which you're moving on the ramp would actually change your relationship to that aperture, this kind of long perimeter aperture as you like move down through it. And I think a really simple, in keeping with the kind of image that you show at the end, which is the fun image that you get to put the birds in, it like looks to the roof, but some image like that actually starts to map that ocular relationship between your moving the moving subject as you move down into the project, and that perimeter band would be really interesting to see. I don't know if that was like motivating your thinking in any way.
That was really interesting. I wish I had done that, but thank you. Hopefully like can do something like that in the future.
Well, I'll piggyback on some of these comments relative to perspective. But first off, Claire, I've always adored the way you draw, often pointing my students to your region in the concept board. So really well represented and really well developed project. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
And great initial diagram, very clear. I was immediately able to read the project through the graphic that you set up. For me, one of the most kind of compelling aspects of the project, well, in addition to sort of understanding the void as a threshold space, as this sort of like palate cleanser before entering each of the different flavors of Galleria, is the kind of play of scale that you've got going on between section and plan, right? I think in section, the scale of these atria or these voids is vast, and I think that speaks to the kind of monumentality of the project and of the kind of history that it's referencing. When one is sort of in that space, one gets that sense of monumentality, and we can certainly gather that from the perspective looking up with the birds, right? That scale is just massive in section, but it's quite intimate in plan. So when you enter the galleries, there's sort of the proportion and plan is almost tight. And so it is a space that, and we see this, I think, in the ramp image with also, I love catching the kind of interior moment of the figure's legs, right? That this is a place that you kind of want to navigate either with one other individual or alone. So I think managing those scales of sort of vastness but intimacy between the sort of two architectural projections is really mature and just really well controlled in the project. So congratulations. I would say, if anything, I would push the kind of perspectival narrative to support that, those kind of polar positions of the kind of intimacy and the monumentality. So like a shot from the atria where you're looking and you see just the kind of vertical vastness, and then a shot like in a gallery where it perhaps like the space collapses.
Yeah, I'll try to jump in here. I don't know if I'll be as eloquent as the earlier comments, but I think it's a fantastic project. I mean, I love it. I mean, I think like it hits all the bases, you know, so to speak. I think the drawings are fantastic. I think it's great that you've explored also like the way that you shoot photographs of models. And I think that's really useful. I mean, I think that there's one way to think about the rendering or the perspective as a way to give sort of a photographic gaze into the project, but then also I think the models offer a different opportunity to test the forms in relation to light and shadow and other qualities. And I think you've captured that quite well. I mean, I particularly like the chunky model that has like the floating little bits and pieces in it. I don't know exactly what all that stuff is in there, but it's like the quarter inch like block white model. Could you just tell me a little bit what that is? Like what that model is?
So it's showing my exhibition space, but kind of like in a separate way, I guess. And I guess, could you clarify that a little bit?
Well, like, what am I looking at? Like, quite literally. I
Why
mean,
don't you go to the photo,
chunk
Claire?
of- what's- Oh, yeah. Do you want me to annotate?
No. Sorry, I just was saying, Claire, why don't you actually go back to that photo? You can navigate back and forth.
That's
Yeah.
better.
Sorry about
Okay, yeah. I'm so sorry. This is
Oh,
so slow.
No need to apologize. I'm looking at it on concept board, so it's
Okay,
that's a
I'm
luxury
so
to
sorry.
recognize a great
Oh,
process.
now it's even smaller. I think it might be better if I also went to concept board. This is becoming difficult. 1 second. So sorry. Okay. So in this photo.
That body.
This girl's project is really good.
So this model is basically looking at if you were in the center space, this is what your view would be looking at it, but fully just separate model. So it's looking at the atrium.
Yeah, but is this all building or is this earth and this is building?
So this would be building and this would be earth, but I wanted to model it like in reference to Thomas Pfeiffer's kind of space models.
Yeah.
So I thought I would just extend the walls all the way down.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's effective. I mean, I think what you're demonstrating is like mass or poche or something like that. You might want to explain that a little bit because, like, when you're doing a presentation, because it could be a little confusing. I mean, this is nitpicky stuff, but like, I think it's a really wonderful model because it's so different, really, than the character of some of the other pieces. It's like thick, it's heavy, it's chunky, and it gives a slightly different character to the project than some of the other drawings that are kind of atmospheric and light, etc. One thing that I really love about the project is the range of exploration in media. This is something that if you've ever had a class with me, and Carrie certainly heard me talk about this before, but it's in reference to Hegel, and who basically says something to the effect that not all things are possible in a given medium. And what I love about architects and architecture is the range with which we explore media to tell a complete and coherent story. And so, I'd want to kind of encourage you to continue to explore the media to be able to tell as rich of a story about the project as possible, but then attending to those differences so that you can be clear with what is exposed about the work with respect to a particular type of drawing, like perspective versus plan versus section versus model and diagram. And so, I mean, I think the premise of the studio, which asks to explore section in clear and critical ways, can be sort of enrolled to do some of that work for you. So, just an encouragement to be able to talk specifically about the role of media and the type of media and how that participates in the story that you're telling about the work. The one thing that I think would maybe benefit a little bit is the sections at present are a little sketchy. Like, they're really crisp and clear, but they're not finished to the same sense of resolution as the perspectives are. So like Troy's earlier comment about, like, is this enclosed? Is this open? Is it like these monolithic, like Stonehenge-like forms that are then sort of stacked on top of each other that create these open air environments? Or is there windows and glazing or mullions and whatnot? So I think like the sections could beef up a little bit. So a portfolio, future portfolio piece for this might be like adding some more lines in the sections and just differentiating a little bit more what the material properties are that the building is forecasting. The drawings are stunning in general.
Yeah. What I like about the comments we have so far, and I think some of the things that have come up, even in that model image that Ben's pointing out, is there's a problem that you've set up for yourself that I think maybe has some clear answers, but they're not completely answered in this presentation, which is the relationship of this incredibly light roof to the ground, I would say. And right now, the way things are rendered in some of the images are, like the model, for instance, it's relatively monolithic, like it's represented all in like foam core. It's like the same material, whether you're like rendering ground or whether you're rendering your like floating roof. And your sections suggest like if there's like a different logic in the section where you actually start to have a really, really heavy like bathtub of concrete that's like separating the ground. And then there's these like lighter walls, and then there's even these lighter columns that like frame the glass openings. And then you have this very light roof. And then the image of like looking at the birds, you're like really seeing those like little columns and frames that like make your roof kind of float in those spaces, really feel light. And I think that some kind of, I think representation is definitely a way into it. And I think it's really important, but maybe some way at this point to really think about what belongs to the ground and what belongs to the roof, or how you get as an architect from the ground to the roof. Not so much like how do you hold up the roof as a structure, like that's like pretty straightforward, but I think materially and geometrically, like how you negotiate that space, to me, there's some different projects that could emerge. If I look at your project in the images looking at your project from the landscape, which are some of my least favorite images of your project, it becomes like very closed and kind of monolithic looking, almost like it's a geologic object in the landscape. When I look at some of the sections or some of the, especially like the section perspective or some of the sections, it actually becomes more like the landscape has been deflected and there's this like very light object that's sitting inside of that that bowl or bathtub that you've made. It's a kind of landscape move, and that's where maybe the break is. But I think like looking through that as these like hypothetical like last phase of your project happens into your portfolio, I think would maybe I think the project's set up really well, so you can start to see those questions clearly. But I feel like that's one of the primary questions the project asked me to kind of resolve as a juror is how are you getting from the landscape move to this very light roof? And that's like a kind of fun project for an architect. So yeah, thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Claire. Appreciate the hard work. And we'll kind of keep things going a little bit. I have the unfortunate task of keeping time, so I'm sorry if it's not as kind of seamless as I would hope. So thank you so much, Claire. Any other questions before we move on?
Nice
you good?
project. Thanks for going first, Claire.
Thank you guys for being here and for all the feedback. I really appreciate it.
All right, thanks so much. And then Jordan, you're up. And I might just ask students if you don't mind turning off your enhanced lines in your Acrobat. It's under, if you do Command or Control K, you'll just uncheck that box, please. All right, Jordan, take it away.
Hi, sorry, I'm in your audition. I'm sorry, I'm getting like some warning about my privacy preferences and not allowing it to screen share.
For in Zoom, Jordan? You may have to log out and maybe log back in, but we can keep moving maybe just to, why don't you figure that out and we'll get back to you next. All right, Will, you want to take it away? You might be muted. No, I still can't hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. I lost the window. Yeah, let me open this up. Sorry about this.
It also feels like that building used to be part of the
Okay.
land, like it was.
So
Troy, you're getting a little peek into the pavilions that we're teaching in the semester.
That was pulled into the lake by another force, i.e. such as a sinkhole.
sorry about this. I was a little caught off guard.
Also, what I noticed about the
Should we keep moving on or do you want to?
Okay. Yes, I am.
About 10 feet away from each other.
Okay.
So
Let me screen share this.
Going inside of land and out into the water. So if you see on my floor plan on the right.
Sorry, I'm not very good to Zoom.
Entire plan, and that is.
So
There it is. There it is.
Share screen is the green little button.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's set up a little bit of a.
Let me. This is.
And you can see, so on the right is my bottom floor plan.
Okay.
Someone could enter in, right?
So
And then,
this is kind of a overall, or well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us in the review today. It's been a very fun project, I thought. It's been a very, helped me understand a lot more about my design process, about using site, about just working through issues, whether it be in the studio or in the drawings. So I'd like to direct your attention to my concept diagram. Oh no. Okay, that was not supposed to happen. Okay, so my concept diagram, I really took a lot of inspiration from the UHA Women's University. And basically in this design, there were a sort of already pillared rooms underneath the earth, which kind of mirrored the topography of the hill it was placed on. I like this idea, especially with the, I chose sort of a hybrid between the hillside and the pier site. Here's more of a broad view of the site Here's a little bit more zoomed in. So my building would be placed, I don't know if you can see my mouse right now, right around here. Let me start with the plans. So basically, it is a pretty simple geometry from the roof plan. The entry sequence actually connects to an existing path, and it kind of just extrudes from the, I guess, old mining site path and connects into the building, into this central walkway. Let me move to another plan. This is my first plan cut through the first floor. So basically you walk in this main entry place right here, and you have the opportunity to move into the lobby area here and circulate down this staircase, bringing you to the second floor, where you will arrive about right here. You now have the opportunity to, relax in this little seating area, or move to other gallery spaces or office spaces. Here's a viewing or a movie room. I guess you could watch some of the history of Jefferson Island, maybe the same video we did. This is sort of a reading area where you can kind of, I guess, study up on some of the history that happened in the accident. This is the final and bottom floor. It's sort of a more opened up exhibit area with a mining cage in the middle, a salt wall in the back, which extends actually to the second floor also. Now I'd like to move to the sections and elevations. This is an elevation drawing of the building from the side. These sort of triangle shapes that line the roof of the building are actually light wells, which alternate sides. I guess you can kind of see it in the plan. They alternate on each side. And I thought this helped direct light in a more intimate way with the building, allowing light to help guide a person down into the design. Here's a section cut showing those light wells. Light filters down and kind of goes through all 3 floors to truly light it up, I guess, better than just not constructed light. It's actually natural sunlight. Here's another section cut showing the light wells on the other side, still filtering down into the bottom floors. And I broke from the typical grid system I had to give some rooms a bigger, sort of bigger area for exploration. Here is a section cut through the middle of my drawing. It is a sort of photoshopped, illustrated section cut. I took a lot of inspiration from some old Giatti drawings that we were looking at in class. So I attempted to recreate that similar style. Here's the axonometric drawing I have of the building. I guess you can really see the light wells in this one well, alternating side by side. And it is on grade when you enter in that first main stretch. And as you go down 1 floor, you're now on grade with the bottom of the hill in this second little window area. Here's a perspective view from standing basically right at the front of that initial walkway that you start on. And then here's a inside perspective view of standing at the top of the staircase, moving from the second level to the bottom level. And finally, I want to direct your attention to a drawing that we did as a class. This is I titled it Suspended Layers. It is also taken from another old Giatti precedent. I thought this kind of showed I didn't include all of the columns, but I thought it kind of showed the important parts moving from one level to the next, and kind of the column method I used to help differentiate space and different moments within the building. So yeah.
Great, thanks, Will.
A question about the columns. And the last drawing that you showed, are they skewed an angle, or are they vertical?
They are all vertical. This is they are only skewed in this for a sort of dramatic effect. This is
This is like a kit of parts drawing where you're just showing the kit of parts just all stacked up on the page.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like you bought these supplies for us to make a building with, and this is what you did.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Would you like the columns to be sloping?
I actually never really considered sloping columns. I wasn't really sure about the structural integrity of a sloping column, but I mean, that would definitely be an interesting exploration.
Yeah, I mean, maybe one other follow-up question. And one of the things that strikes me about the project, and it's quite coherent, but one of the aspects of its coherency is the kind of distinct similarity of the volumes. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit to that effect of like the homogenizing effect of similarity among the configuration of rooms and program.
So actually, initially, it was basically the program was even more set to this kind of grid-like scheme, where, I mean, I was definitely using the room and pillar method as one of my driving factors for using the columns. But I think working through like such a rigid structure, I decided to just start to break from it in some spots, and you can see it, I think, best in this drawing where this movie room kind of widens to open up, and then especially in this second floor plan.
That's a great, actually, if you go back to that section, I think that section actually exposes some real intrigue to the project, where I think you could almost take some lessons from that one, where you could start to explore like volume through section, and then kind of adjust the cellular nature that's sort of apparent in that initial diagram. And then what I could imagine too would be sort of a transitional diagram that suggests diversity of configuration and how that might be deployed with some sort of underlying goal or motive of circulation, let's say. But I think like this section is actually really useful in exposing ways to start to enliven the building in ways that maybe in plan view, it's a little tricky sometimes to sort of see those differences and how they might exist.
Yeah, I think this is a good project, Will. I like a lot of the things that it's doing, kind of nestling the project into the landscape, referencing some of the kind of industrial and like extraction economy, like history of the site, and like using that as a kind of way to make a building. That said, I want to give you something, and I want to take something away from you to make the project a little bit more difficult for you, because I feel like you've made the project a little bit too easy for yourself in a couple of different ways. One is, and I think this section is a really revealing drawing, as Ben noted. I think that you're playing with this kind of like the light monitor, right? Which is this kind of industrial, like factory roof, north facing light element in architecture. And that light monitor in this drawing is like penetrating what you've drawn is this like thick poche of a ground, right? And it looks like almost like you're taking these like core samples into a ground, which is like a really beautiful, way to conceive of an architecture at the top of the building. But then it disintegrates into like this like massive amount of columns, which I think are a little bit different than pillars. And so you have like columns, you have the light monitors, you have these very narrow bays that anyway can like support all kinds of different things like spanning it. It seems like if you took away one of those elements, I would like suggest the columns. And if there was some way that you could make the project just of like light monitors penetrating the ground, I think it would like help give you some kind of like clarity structurally. The other thing, so that's what I want to take away from you in a way, and see if you can do the same project with like a little bit less. The other thing I'd want to do is give you more windows. I don't know how to say this in a
Okay.
smart professor way, but I don't quite understand why having the light, and you describe light monitors as though like it's a little bit your personal invention, but they're pretty like, I mean, maybe that's just the moment you are in your education, you've like kind of discovered them. But I don't know, and this is more of a question, so maybe I'm giving this to you. Hopefully you're taking this in a little bit of the tongue-in-cheek way I'm offering it, but you know, the idea that you could like see the landscape, I don't know if it necessarily goes away with the idea that light is coming in, or exactly how that relationship to the landscape just becomes these kind of like picture windows at the end of the project, like out towards the water, I guess, is actually what that would be the view towards. And I think that the if you have the challenge, I think this project looks really kind of amazing at the top of the section here. But if you go back to say your elevation, didn't you have an elevation?
Yeah, right here.
Yeah, I don't exactly know why this elevation has like zero penetrations offered us like in this part of the landscape, or how that like supports. I mean, maybe it does, and you could come back and say like, oh, but it has to be this way because we're like developing film or something inside of these rooms. But my understanding is that the project is a visitor center for the site, right? And there would be some kind of relationship that you'd want to have from the interior to the site that I think gets a little bit lost in the sectional quality of the light monitors. And if you had to negotiate that space and make something that feels as like, I think like dense and rich and like inhabits the kind of ground of the site, but also have that relationship to the landscape, I think that would just like enrich what's already a pretty interesting project. Yeah.
Mhm.
I will. Yeah, I don't have so much to add beyond what's been said. I have a couple comments. One about your presentation style, and it's a couple cheap shots. So hopefully you hear it from me, and then you never have to hear it again. But I would try to restrict the use of using I too much in your verbal presentation. It's the project that is speaking, really not you so much. Or remove the kind of personal from it. But then I think you also could benefit from sort of like a magician never revealing your hand, discussing the sort of like Oggiati references or the class-wide drawing. Like it undermines your project in a way. It undermines the fact that you put those drawings forward with your own kind of agency. So again, some cheap shots, but in the future you won't do that again, and then you won't receive those. I think the other part of your project that perhaps is I think is really strong, but perhaps underrepresented, is this relationship of the light and dark in the project. So the form of your project is, light is becoming a huge driver of that form and the organization, the sectional organization. And so, if Olgiati is a hero of yours, I would say like the Perling site in Bahrain would be a good reference to look. It's also a visitor center. And a lot of it is sort of submerged. But it kind of plays with, I think, like sort of deliberate and careful puncture of horizontal roof surface to kind of position light in like specific ways. So it's highly controlled. And so it appears like if you go to your, go to one of your sections. Yeah, great. There'd be like this syncopation of in the lower level of like a kind of tic-tac-toe of dark and light based on your sort of like a tic-tac-toe approach of the light shafts, which I think is like a really clever and appropriate tie-in to your referencing of the room and pillar, right? And like one of the like striking aspects of that historic image of the room and pillar not only is the scale, but the qualities of light and dark that we're getting from the sort of air shafts, or and then the like the darkness of being underground. So somehow I think your project has those qualities, but it's not showing those qualities. So that's where I say underrepresented, because I think you have that in your head, that that's the kind of quality of space. That's the quality of light that exists. That light will be brought into these rooms, and then adjacent to that room, perhaps it's a really dark space. And I think that contrast is fantastic. So I would say, how do you use your sort of full arsenal of representation to start to substantiate the claims that you're making in the proposal, right? And so it could be perspective, would be one spot to begin.
Okay,
I think
thank you.
the cellular quality of this project in relation to some of the comments Carrie's making. I mean, I would look at like Mancia Tunan's like USAC project. I think there's actually a little bit of a field-based like matte logic to the way you're playing with the cells of the skylights. And when Carrie started describing the contrast between light and dark, I started to imagine, those voids that you're right now rendering as ground in this section are actually cells in the kind of logic of the plan as a matte, right? And it seems like you could make more out of the light wells, the kind of grid of the project, meaning where you have a light well and where you don't have a light well, as a kind of like more even matte structure, and just almost get rid of all the columns. I don't know, I keep trying to get rid of the columns, but like you can actually do a lot of what the spans are not that great. It's a cellular project, which is what Ben was referring to, I think, a bit as well. And you could probably get more out of that. Maybe with a few more references that are some of these projects are bigger than yours, but they actually have a lot of the same logic, because the way you have a cell that you turn on as a light well, or you turn off as ground as the basis for the plan making.
Do we have to jump, Nimet?
Quick comment, go for it, Ben.
If you just zip over to your Axon.
Sure.
I just want to point out a couple. I'm zooming in on it on concept board, and one of the things I want to point out is sort of the conflation of multiple kind of characters in this axon. So like even in the representation of the trees, some are like graphic notation, and some are sort of representation of the thing itself. So like you use like line work to depict like branches, and in other cases you use a graphic to sort of suggest the graphic representation of trees. So you're conflating hatch with material properties. And that's kind of a jarring effect. And likewise, the elevational qualities of the building itself are using a hatch, which would be typically used in a crochet. But then also the windows, the lanterns or whatever you're calling them, they look as though they're opaque, but then the windows below suggest that it's an opening, not a glazing system. So you want to have consistency with these kind of graphic effects so that you have sort of command of the communication of its identity, so that it's not a conflation of oppositional things, but rather a suggestion of consistency. But you can let those divergences occur in other drawings, but you just want to be consistent within the drawing itself. That was maybe a little bit longer than I anticipated. Sorry, Matt.
No, I think that's a great kind of point to kind of wrap up on. Will, any other questions before we move on?
I think I'm actually all right.
Okay, great.
Thank you, though.
Great. Thank you so much for your presentation. You've shown great kind of progress this semester. So I'm so happy that you landed on such a beautifully kind of a beautiful and thoughtful project. So thanks so much, Will.
Thank you.
All right, Jordan, you're up next.
I think I got it. Okay. Hey, yeah, hi, my name is Jordan, and I guess the project that I kind of created for you today, I called Rising Levels. So it kind of first got developed from a precedent that I was looking at called Sky House. And in my original analysis of this precedent, I was kind of drawn to a series of platform and stairs that led up to this main section of the house. I also went on to kind of, as I was iterating the project, drawing from the Jisu library by OMA, which is, yeah, this one, and then this one is Sky House. I kind of wanted to create a system of ramps and platforms that extended this journey of rising to a final space. This one down here I called Unwrap Descent, which is basically just different kind of, it's kind of shifted to kind of more of an axonometric view, but it's my ramp levels unwrapped, literally, for each elevation. So as you kind of approach the project, these are my plans, my site plans. So kind of as you approach the project through this way, you come, you start to see levels of my space wrapped in glass. And as you come into the project, you are kind of on this ramp that connects not only the land, but also to the project, which is over water. At the bottom level, you reach a lobby and information center, which is here, as well as a gallery and a small eating space, as well as a viewing space for videos. This is all level area, but it's places where you can interact with different types of programs. So after you reach all that, more various program is kind of encountered as someone travels further upwards on the ramp, first onto a more expansive exterior ramp that is here, to a more interior ramp that keeps going up this way. So on the second level that you reach, a viewer can travel through a U-shaped corridor of archived bookshelves into an open, expansive central space where a visitor can see a mining cage that hangs above like a chandelier in a roof skylight. So this is that U-shaped space with archived books and stuff, and then the mining cage as well. Also on the second floor is another gallery section, which is here, as well as a cafe. And then in the back, more private space, like restrooms and office space over here. As you continue up on the last sort of section of ramping, is kind of where you circulate around the actual mining cage to a final platform where there is a final view of a roof skylight at the top. And then my axon kind of helps show how you would travel up the ramp to this main space of the skylight. And that's my model. And I guess that's about it. Thank you.
Jordan, do you have an overview page?
I don't, but I can go to the concept board if that.
The question is, can you just,
Sorry.
could you go back to the concept, when you get to the concept board, can you take us to that section and just explain what the layers are that we're seeing in that drawing?
Okay, is it
like where the ground is and the water and the trees? I'm a little bit having trouble understanding its relationship in that section to those elements.
Yeah, so these are my two sections. So kind of there's land over here, and I did a bad job of implementing my actual approach ramp into my section, but you would be approaching down here and entering on this like level right here.
But is there water or something down here? Is that what you're showing?
Yeah, it's water. Sorry, my project is over water on the pier site.
Right. So where's the water level? Is that's actually right here, right?
Yes.
Or where? Okay, I got it right the second time. Okay. And is the water always there, or is there, this is the lake water, right? So it's not tidal or anything like that or affected by, it's always pretty stable height.
Yeah.
Unless somebody puts a hole in the salt mines below, I guess it starts to drain out.
Yeah, for a second time.
Would you say that you designed this in plan or in section?
Primarily in plan.
Yeah, it reads that way. And I think you would want to give equal attention to the section as you do the plan. The plans are beautiful. They're absolutely stunning. You know, they're super clear, everything's organized, and it maps like a really interesting building. And I can imagine walking through there, and like even the range of spatial qualities, I think is really, really lovely. But then when I get to the section, I'm like, oh man, how does this translate? And so right now, like even like I think that there are ways to make all of the sort of differentiated heights of the volumes in section sort of work in your favor. But at present, it looks a little discombobulated, like it's sort of in search of kind of a clarity. And I think it's probably close, but I think that the section could probably go through another round of revision or sort of maybe even simplification in relation to the plans, and also to build up the kind of graphic density that exists in the plans equally in the section, because they want to be in dialogue with one another in pretty strict ways. And to me, it's just a little bit of a shortcoming right now, but I know you can do it because the plans are there. But and it's not a preference of designing in plan or in section, but just to be able to attend to kind of the equivalency of the need to have them both legible in the same ways.
Yeah, I agree with Ben about the project and plan is super clear, and it's your plans are lovely. So perhaps you can zoom into the middle plan. I think one of the assets of a ramp is that you can also look forward while you're circulating, right? As opposed to stairs that you need to kind of look down at your feet to make sure that you're not going to trip. And so I think it was a smart move to use the ramp, but then I would leverage its kind of strength of also allowing you to view and observe at the same time. And so I think what's curious in the plan, and perhaps like one area to consider, is like the insistence on this wall. Does this wall need to be full height? Let me clear that. Because what ends up happening, right, is that then you have this little entry and then you have to, of course, circulate again. And so that becomes a little bit redundant. And so one of the aspects that perhaps drew you to Jussieu, the library, is ramp, like circulation and occupation of that space are one and the same. And so I think that would be an area to like push in your project is why be redundant, right? Like why have to descend and then have to kind of walk on flat, or like challenging the nature of flat ground, right? Like this whole project, like semester is really about kind of challenging our assumptions about ground. And so I think to sort of collapse the space of circulation, the space of program could be one area that I think the project is set up to explore quite nicely.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of elements in the project that are really interesting. And one reason I was trying to understand your citing more clearly is because I guess I have a really big question for the project that has a lot of different possible answers. And if I was reflecting on this like over the holidays as a student, I might think back and think like, how does the fact that this project is built over the water actually impact the way in which I was making plan and section? And is it like, because it does open up the question in a different way than the other ones we've seen so far today, about the nature of the ground and like the constructed nature of ground. And, Jussieu's an interesting example, but like, I think, I'm thinking about like Corbusier's Venice Hospital as well, which is a project that's kind of like built in the, marshes of the Veneto, and has to deal with the problem of ground, and that legacy of modernism, it has to establish, or it doesn't has to, but does operate by establishing its own kind of datum. It's a kind of conceptual ground that it begins to work the rest of the project around. And so in that case, there's a kind of a datum on the top that then kind of unravels as you get down towards the surface of the city below. So I think that the project could be a little bit more free in the section. It's so careful in the plan. And that would be a contrast that you could play out more given the fact that your site is, I don't want to say free, but a little bit more, it's not given in the same way as like a typical architectural site, right? And I was looking for more of that. Like, is there a place where it would dip down and just like kiss the surface of the water, or there would be a place where it would like open up in a way that the sun would come through to the water on the inside, or that kind of sectional quality is available to you in a way that, and that's why, you even admitted in your own little self critique, like not really showing the ramp, where you enter a project on the water like that, starts to establish that relationship to a new kind of ground, right? You leave the earth and you're in the air in some other way. So I think that's a potential in the project. And I could see then a whole series of questions playing out for you slightly differently, but it's very accomplished and it has all the parts and pieces, I think, of a very accomplished project in that sense as well. That makes me wonder what would happen if you were just opening up a little bit to the freedom that's inherent in that initial move.
Yeah, I think what's attached to like a kind of assertion of ground is also a changing horizon as well, right? If ground is different, then horizon is also going to be different. And I think that's an area where the project, and I think this has been mentioned, is sort of sightless in a way. But I think tying it back to the site with a stronger relationship, I think you're set up to do that with the ramp. I think, right, like you are spiraling, and that does reposition the body's relationship to the horizon and what that view might be in the middle of this lake. At certain moments, it's going to be just the sort of trunks of trees, these kind of vertical columns. And in other cases, maybe it's the canopies, and maybe in other cases, it's just the sort of glimmer of water. So I think kind of, whether the siting is secondary to the project, I think controlling those kind of glimpses that relate to your circulation sequence could be one kind of back to the like a kind of stronger relationship with the sighting.
Yeah, there's a tension between like the real and the abstract, right, in the site, where there's when I'm looking at this plan that you have highlighted as Carrie's talking, I'm thinking that the site in a way is that like 16 square grid of columns that is that then you're negotiating these walls and this movement around, right? But the site is also, reframing an actual very entangled, geologic, post-industrial site that is also the verticals of the trees and the existing piers and these other kinds of artifacts, right? And I think the negotiation between that abstract site that we see in the plan, and maybe that is what generates the plan, and maybe the real site that's like framed in some of the sectional moves, I think is a really, cool aspect of the project. And it'd be, anyway, in reflection, I think something to like figure out how you draw out more. Yeah.
Great.
Other quick comments. The columns appear a bit as an afterthought at the moment. They look like a grid that came in after the design was created. I could be wrong about that, but just the way that they sort of are in competition with the walls, it seems like that could be a resolution that could either have greater clarity or more sort of smoothing out. And also the siting of the building in the lake, for better or worse, you almost have to own it as an object, as a thing. It has a different relationship to ground in ways that the other projects that we've seen so far don't have. And you have to sort of own that, I think, its objecthood as a thing in a landscape that it does not touch. And so what does that mean? And how do you activate that as an opportunity or a shortcoming? But it seems as though it's a particular presence of the building that would have to be attended for in its argument.
Great. I think that's a great kind of comment to end on. So Jordan, you have a lot to kind of think about over the break and consider. So thank you so much for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
Nice project.
Natalie, you ready to go?
Yes. Okay. So, hi, my name is Natalie Miller, and the project is called The In-Between, and it focuses on the juxtaposition of the marshlands to the salt mine located on Jefferson Island. And the project's objective is to explore the in-between of land and water and the circulation logic of the room and pillar method in the salt mine. So the room and pillar method floor plan of the salt mine is symmetrical for speed and efficiency of the workers. However, 3 methods, cluster, shift, and unify, were used to disrupt the system, so visitors would have to take their time to experience the project thoroughly. These 3 methods form the project's party. And then for the site analysis, it focuses on the in-between land of land and water, and where land and water blur together, like a swamp and marsh land. And then the approach of the project is extended from a previous path on Jefferson Island, which is extended and meanders through the landscape and brings the visitor into the land, since the entrance of the project is below the ground. And then the site section shows how the project is situated in the land and how it's in the in-between space and slowly sinks into the ground, and how it's embedded into the land. And then for the plan, the starting point was the party diagram, and it focuses on the circulation and in-between space. So circulation becomes program and program becomes circulation, and it's more public spaces. So the circulation is from this more gray hatched area where circulation and program come together, and the more white hatched is more private space with program. And then also the walls are thickened, so program can be embedded to these walls, so people can have an enriched experience in these in-between spaces. And the program in these walls are based on surrounding programs, so it'd either be like a bookcase or artifacts or seating areas in this space. And then for this section shows how a person would inhabit these in-between spaces, and how, starting off the project, the ceiling stays the same, but as you go down each ramp, it drops about 3 feet. So it goes from almost a compression to expansion at the very end. So the highest room is at the very end of the project. And then skylights are above these thickened wall conditions with the program embedded into them to bring natural diffused light into these spaces. And then this section shows how people going down the ramp and alongside a salt wall, and also the program embedded into these thickened wall spaces, and what they would be utilized and people would experience this space, and also the relationship with the land, and how almost half the project is above the land and half of it's below. So the visitor doesn't know where they are located in the land. So it's kind of like also in this in-between space. And then in the oblique showing this, also these apertures at the ends of these bars of circulation to allow views out and bring natural light into these spaces, and also showing the skylights again, and how there's 1 skylight for every program along these thickened wall conditions. And then this perspective entry drawing shows how the project is situated in the land, and how somebody would approach the project, and how they're below the land approaching, but still there's air above them. And also how it's located with the water on the site. And then another exterior perspective, again, showing the relationship of the project with the land, and then the final look out. This aperture showing visitor could see this in-between land and this almost on this thickened wall condition. And then this is like an in-between perspective of this in-between circulation program space, showing how one would interact with it and all the different objects placed in these walls in program. And then another interior perspective showing the final exhibition space and showing the final view out, and also program embedded into these walls and a mine shaft for Jefferson Island. And then my 1/16th model showing approach and a physical representation of how the project is embedded in the land and how half it's above, almost half it's above the ground and half it's below the ground again. And then a more frontal view of the 1/16th model and showing like the surrounding landscape. And then finally, model with the roof taken off, showing these interior walls and highlighting the more circulation in between path and furniture and scale figures to show how one would inhabit this space. And then finally, a worm's eye view to show these thickened wall conditions and how program is embedded into these walls and how one experience from these walls, more highlighting these in between spaces and thickened wall conditions. Thank you.
Natalie, while I form some kind of more cohesive thoughts about your project, which I think is lovely. I've written down lovely so many times here. And so I think I need to do some work on defining what lovely means to me. But I have lovely partie, lovely oblique, lovely perspective. And it occurred to me what I found really successful is your presentation. The way that you walked us through the drawings was super successful, at least for me. I really appreciated the order that you presented the project in, and the fact that each of these drawings was doing substantial work to describe the project. So I want to congratulate you on that. Perhaps the one kind of comment relative to the design that I can make is, well, I enjoy it. I enjoy the project immensely. But I want to relate it to, and Professor ANWAR was at my review too, so she'll be familiar with this, with the kind of terms that I'm going to get into. Is like the term evenness was brought up a lot on Monday in my section, and like a conversation that like I had a lot with my students was, you know, how do you kind of imbue a little bit of variation, but then as soon as students hear variation, it's like you turn the dial too much, right? And my students are sick of this analogy, but like adding cinnamon to apple pie, like you add too much and the pie is inedible. So I guess what I'm reacting to is like, how do you invest a little bit of variation? Because I think your project can absorb it and it could benefit from it without going too far. So, you know, on one hand, the evenness, right, or the kind of sameness of all of your kind of like niches that are carved out of the walls. I think there could be some variation there. And maybe that's driven by the actual artifacts that are beginning to populate that space. And so, you know, maybe I see the sort of like use of poche and the scale of the niches as a kind of a placeholder in a way. And but ripe for kind of tuning once the sort of like the curator gives you the checklist of artifacts or something. And I would say like likewise is the scale or like the proportion in section, but even in plan too, of the rooms. right? Like it could potentially jiggle a little bit past the boundary and plan. And they could kind of jiggle in height past the boundary of the like hard edge of the ceiling to sort of break one's expectation, right? So as soon as upon like you enter that room, you're like, there's like this surprise, and maybe it's a Clara story, like the lighting changes all of a sudden, and there's just like, there's one room that is the exception. So those are areas to explore that I think your project is set up for. It's set up perfectly because it's sort of two projects that are swallowing each other. There's the circulation, which is almost like an independent building from the kind of pavilions that it touches. And so there's opportunity to sort of like shake the cinnamon, but just a little bit.
Well, Carrie, you're calling them pavilions, which I think is a really important reading of the plan, especially. And I think to me, brings up one of my bigger questions, I think, for you, Natalie, and but it's also kind of a question for the studio, is there's a kind of response to the site. You know, it's this supercharged site. There's like so much going on. I mean, wow, it's like, this is the best possible site you'll like ever get as an architect in terms of like themes that you could like engage with. And yet all the projects have, they kind of create like a figure in the landscape, and then they like work in from that figure, almost like they're either like submerging things, or you know, if they move off the coast into the lake, like there's a kind of autonomy that they're imagining for themselves. And I look at the plan of your project, and I do see a series of pavilions that are then connected together by peripatetic, or like a moving kind of subject, an architectural promenade, I guess is one way to describe it, like that like weaves its way through the pavilions. But then I look at the bottom of the page at your representation of this building and landscape, and it's this monolithic box, right? And you don't see any of like the pavilion quality like in the monolithic box. And that's like two, I think they're both cool projects. I mean, it's like, but as you read that tension, you know, I keep wondering if there's a way, like there's two kinds of pavilions. There's one kind of pavilion that's a closed box, and there's another kind of pavilion that is a, you know, a U-shaped pavilion like this. And I wonder like why the U-shaped pavilion never, like, instead of turning inward, like turns outward, right? So you get a kind of carving or a courtyard, and that might have a relationship to, you know, I don't know if it's like one spectacular tree, or like one like roosting site, or one like moment in the site. I mean, if this is a visitor center, I think that one of the theses in the studio, and how we haven't seen all the projects, might be that because it's such a charged site, the only way to really see it is to like see it and then step away from it and create some kind of critical distance in these chambers that are these kind of submerged or enclosed chambers that let you have that kind of perspective back onto the site as a kind of a lens. So maybe that's your answer, but I think that tension between the autonomous monolithic project and this kind of series of pavilions strung together along a line is what, to me, makes, you know, is the kind of motivating question in the project. And I think, you know, there's a lot of articulation in each one of those parts that I find fascinating. But I would like to think, if I was like, you know, again, reflecting on the project here at the end of the semester, I would reflect on that tension in the project.
Yeah, I'll try to pick up on some of these thoughts, because I think they're really excellent suggestions for you to move forward with. And you know, you're probably not going to go back and redesign this thing, but I mean, I share the intrigue of like a slight deviation from the evenness. And you know, I mean, this is maybe dating me generationally, but like you know, when I was a student, like Boolean operations were a move. But in some ways, like a suggestion for a Boolean operation of an ellipse or something could create a divergence from the even-handedness of the poché. And I'm thinking too about a lecture I saw about 10 years ago by Marcos Cruz, and I'll try to lay another metaphor in here, but like maybe too much cinnamon, but the metaphor that he gave was the fleshiness of Baroque interiors. And for whatever reason, that has stuck with me forever. And I love thinking about the poché of Baroque interiors and how those become occupiable. And you're already doing that to a certain degree in this project. And I think if you could instigate another layer of intrigue, as Carrie and Trey are suggesting, I think you could kind of reinvigorate the way that those thickened wall conditions, as you call them, get kind of mobilized as a decisive feature in the project. An example that I think actually might be useful for you that I loved was the Monet water lily room at Musée d'Orsay. It's this kind of like whimsical room where, you know, usually you experience like the paintings on a horizontal and kind of, you know, straight surface, but in this room they're on an ellipse, and it creates this wholly different other kind of experience with architecture and art and what have you, and it's pretty magical. And it's also in like a traditional building, you know, it's a repurposed building to become a museum, but then this elliptical room sort of creates this whimsical feature, but it's done in a very deliberate and serious way. So it's not to just make difference for the sake of difference, but difference with kind of an intention and a set of qualities that drive ideas forward. One last comment I'll make is the photographs of the models to me are an outlier with respect to the clarity and precision of the other drawings. And I would encourage you to attend to how you create the photographs with the same kind of intention. So it's a combination of the craft related to the models, but then also how you curate the image itself. And so, you know, the way that you in perspectives are sort of curating the snapshot, you want to really attend to that as well. This is a general comment to all of the students, but those photographs are really important and do a different set of work. It's not necessarily just a totalizing effect of the model, but you want to curate it with a higher degree of precision. And one of the ones that I'm most interested in is the one where you remove the top of the building. And I'm curious about the time of day that you took that photo, because the shadows are quite dramatic, but what it also shows me is that I mean, the roof is off and it's still quite dark.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so like the perforations of the building facade, like that's a good way to start to use models as a way to start to reimagine or critique your own work, because you're simulating the building and the effects of natural light. But anyways, it's just a suggestion. And I think they could have another layer of kind of critical thought in how they're curated.
Great. That's wonderful. Well, Natalie, any questions before we move on?
No, but thank you all so much for all the ideas and ways I can explore this project more in the future, and also the photography tips and exploring that to like increase my model and everything, which is very nice. Thank you all.
Yeah, I love that model photo too. I just want to say, I think it gives you a suggestion that there's this cross strain in your project that's already there. This is not like another project to draw. That I just think drawing that out as you think about the project is a really important way, maybe to open up some narratives that are would work against in a productive way. Just the singular line that you trace down to the water's edge, right? It's really beautiful the way it comes out in that model and in the way you see it in your plan too. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Ethan, you ready to go? And Ben, I was the one.
Sorry, my AirPods just died, so hopefully they've been charging for a little bit, so hopefully they'll last.
Okay, go for it.
So I'm Ethan Meisler. The site I chose is the pier, kind of sloping towards the water's edge, almost in the section between pier and the point that kind of stems off into the lake. I chose this site because when I visited, I noticed this really large hill that kind of sloped towards a really calm, beautiful bay. And there were like ditches and kind of open space, like sparse trees, kind of open areas. And I thought that was a really like kind of beautiful moment in the site. So the back of the site this is from a farther perspective. So the site would kind of be along the edge up towards the left around here. The back of the site is kind of facing the factory site at the top of the hill, and the front faces the historic loading pier. And by kind of choosing to embed my structure into the ground, I felt like it was being connected to the history of the underground mining activity, to the old factory site, to the loading pier, and to the current layout and view of the site. So here's some kind of large scale plans. So again, this is kind of the area of the bay that I'm talking about, and a section cutting through. So when I came to design the building, I started looking at projects that really successfully embedded their work into the slope, and also was very interested in the idea of a large atrium space and double and triple height spaces. So I use this kind of basic grid to help lay out my building. So this would be the first floor plan in a very kind of party way. This would be the second floor. So kind of programming these back 2 rows and then a balcony overlooking this area of the first floor. And then this is the third floor, kind of in a plan view, again, where the back 2 are used and then the front 2 are balconies overlooking the second and third floor. This highlights the kind of atrium space through the middle in a plan view, and this kind of highlights the atrium space in a sectional view or elevation. So here is my my roof plan on the site, and this is the first floor. So I really tried to focus on circulation in this project of kind of cascading through, but starting bottom up. This is the first floor where there's exhibition space, offices, bathrooms, storage, everything. The way I decided program was thinking about what wanted light and what could be in darkness, and kind of laying out the front space that gets more light, giving that more program that would want to be in light, and then the back spaces that are kind of tucked underneath or like tucked a little bit into the slope or underneath above layers, those could kind of have less natural light. The second floor involves these kind of stairs coming down from the top floor, exhibition space in the front in this room, video exhibition in this room, and kind of this tribune half step up tribune stair that would serve as the reading room. Again, the balcony overlooking the second floor, and kind of views out and would get light from inside or from outside. The third floor involves the entry. So you enter at grade from here, as there is a path that kind of comes down the hill. There's the lobby space and the cafe space. And again, the balcony that you can see over the next levels, kind of going with the flow of the slope. I have these sections that cut through all 3 floors, so that you can kind of see the activity taking place in each floor, cut from either side. And then a big exploration of mine was light, and how to kind of involve light into the front space and the back spaces. So I chose to have large windows on the front facade facing the water to allow views from all 3 floors, and angled the top windows to kind of project moving shadows across all the floors. And then the raised roof allows for clerestory windows to get light from all sides, and especially shine light to the 3rd floor, which gets less light from the front windows. I chose to represent the building with kind of like textual concrete style, and more tiled stairs, trying to keep the materials very simple to not distract. And the railings were a big focus of mine. So I kind of chose to incorporate glass and steel railings in the atrium space through the stairs, and then keeping the balcony railings, keeping them to maintaining the materiality essentially of the balcony railings. So those would also be like a concrete. For this drawing, I chose to represent it in like a double section perspective, where it's cut in 2 ways. So it's cut vertically and horizontally, similar to the previous sections, but kind of both in one and taken in a perspective view. I did this because I really wanted to highlight the flow of the stairs from the entry space all the way through the building and towards the water, which is why I named it Descent. I used kind of some precedents to look for colors and stuff, but I really kind of chose how to do this one on my own, and it was interesting to create. And then I built a model that is at 1/16th scale. The site is made from foam core and kind of sliced through the topography to give a very sectional feel to the building and the site. And then 3D printed the building to kind of show small details on each level, and especially to be able to take it apart where each floor is separate and the walls are separate and the roof is separate. So it's slightly interactive. I showed trees with dowels, scale figures with smaller blue dowels, and the water with kind of a seamless texture with mylar over it. Thank you, guys.
I have a similar question that Ben had in an earlier project, which is, did you primarily design this in plan, and did the kind of envelope of facades come at the end?
For mid-review, I had a very different building. So when I kind of went back to redesign, I kept I tried to keep a good amount of the program by just changing the orientation. So the facade did kind of come secondary, but it came around the same time that I chose how big each floor was and how I would have the balconies, because I did have that idea as I was going through that process of kind of show like windows showing the front side towards the water, and then clerestory windows to get light above.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an accomplished project and plan, and I appreciate the sort of calibration with the site sections, so that between the three levels, one is at grade on the back end, and one is at grade on the front end. I think that's skillfully managed, and that's hard to achieve. So there's certainly a tension in the cross section that I think has taken place. Where I think, and I completely get it. Like, second year is the hardest. Fall is so hard because I'm amazed that the plan works as well as it does. You're contending with space planning. You're contending with learning new softwares and tools and techniques, and this complicated site. It's a lot to take on at once. And so that's where I commend you on the how resolved the plans are. I think for me, where the project reads, and this is a great view to kind of, I think, discuss this, is the envelope, or the kind of formal impression of the project is at odds, I think, with the clarity that exists in the plan. I don't know if you got feedback on that at mid-review, or that's why I asked, did the kind of wrapping of the plan kind of come about after the fact? Because I think it to me has the least resolution. Like, the plan seems calibrated, the programmatic organization seems calibrated, the cross section seems calibrated, but then it's really this envelope that seems a bit of an afterthought at the moment.
Yeah, there's a typology of projects that I would consider that you could imagine. One is a kind of envelope project, which would be like Seattle Public Library, where there's a kind of core, and then like a kind of very free three-dimensional envelope. The other would be kind of like a big roof project, which would be something maybe more like Gun Hall at GSD, where there's a kind of a cascading set of terraces that form a landscape with like a big roof over the top. But your project seems to be setting itself up for some kind of relationship like that, where there's almost like a building within a building or a building under a roof. And I don't think that it's really taken advantage of that kind of a freedom that a project like that would give you as an architect. So, you know, that leaves you free to make this like kind of, it's almost like a ruin, the way in which you've thought about the plan making, because it's kind of embedded into the hillside and it's like symmetrical, which is a kind of a reference of a kind of another way in which you know, circulation and plan making kind of like would have like played out on a site like this. And then on top of that kind of reimagined ruin, you know, a Jefferson area, you have like the Jefferson name is like in the place, but the Jeffersonian era legacy of like plan making in the building that's embedded in the site, and then this kind of freedom for how you imagine the roof or the enclosure over the top, to me is like the real potential of the project and the way you've set it up. And I would think that maybe again that could go back to how you draw these two things. You almost might want to draw them like they're two separate architectures or two separate architects that actually worked on them, just to give them a little bit of freedom, because I think the drawings that you make here that are the axon, I guess the axon drawing and the kind of perspective drawings, I think, in my opinion, try to emphasize too much unity between the two. And you're allowed to, there's no rule for unity necessarily as an architect. You're allowed to, I think, explore the freedom between those components. And your project, to me, suggests that would be one of the things I really like about the envelope versus some of the other schemes we've seen is that some of the other schemes we've seen, really, there's an internal logic that's organizing the plan in relation to the envelope. And because your envelope has so much freedom, it's really responding, or could be, I'm kind of maybe reading a lot into it, but it could be responding to solar orientation, to exposure to views. So you could end up with an envelope that's really highly tuned to certain site conditions, while you have this kind of more autonomous, like perfectly like symmetrical plan. And I think that tension is really, for me, what's motivating my interest in your project.
Great. I'm so sorry. I think we might have to keep moving. I'm doing a really bad job of timekeeping. So Ethan, I'm sorry, Ben.
That's okay. Brilliance was coming, but
do you want to do a quick wrap up? I'm sorry.
No, I love the comments, and I think that they're really great directions forward for the project.
Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you so much, Ethan.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Ethan. Emily, you're up next, and then we'll take a quick break.
Okay. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Sorry, there's a way to put this in like presenting mode. Okay. So everyone can see that? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So hi, my name's Emily Brandt. Jefferson Island is a site that has rich history and many characteristics that are remnant from the past. And within Jefferson Island is the hillside section seen here in this larger section larger site plan. So the hillside is a more secluded and serene portion of the land that is slightly removed actually from many aspects that distinguish the site, such as the mine shaft and the piers and the tree alley. However, as seen in this site section, the site allows for scenic views of the unique land conditions and the vegetation of Jefferson Island. So to address this site situation, this design of the Jefferson Island Visitor Center utilizes angular bars that point in the direction of each of these identifiable landmarks. Beginning from a logic of simple rectangular volumes and diagonal parallelograms of varying sizes, an additive and subtractive method is used to create a relationship between the views of the salt mine, of the mine shaft, the pier, and the LA with the additional programs of the center. So the design sits on the edge of the hillside near the water, partially dug into the land and parallel to the shoreline. A person would enter the building starting from an existing path seen here, and they would descend on a ramp into the building, allowing them to walk under the tree canopies to the first rectangular volume. So as they enter the building, their view is directed ahead of them to a glass wall with a view of the outdoor porch programmed as an outdoor classroom. So as you see here, there's a glass wall here, which you see immediately as you enter. So each angular bar contains a glass wall in the direction of a controlled view and a glass wall that allows a clear view of the courtyard and also provides sufficient light. The larger volumes also contain clerestory windows that are faced in certain directions depending on the program within the spaces. So as a visitor would make their way through through the structure, they descend down ramps within each bar as they make their way deeper into the programs, from the video room to the reading room to the cafe. The halls are additionally used as exhibition spaces with exhibits that match the orientations of the space, such as how the bar pointing towards the mine shaft has the hoist cage and the mine cart. This allows for exhibitions to be broken up into multiple spaces so that it acts as a mode of leading visitors along the history of the site. So additionally, outdoor porches look over the water for a more appealing experience, and their canopies allowed for shade, but also follow the angles of the bars as they extend from them to further reiterate their pointed direction. So all of the canopies kind of follow this like logic that I created. The rectangular boxes also vary in size and height for additional variation of logic. So as seen here, this one's more lengthier in a vertical direction, perpendicular to the shoreline. This one is made smaller, and the last one is a double height with the cafe on the first floor and the office on the second floor. So these are the perspectives. The first one is taken from up higher on the hillside, looking down onto the building and beyond. It also more clearly shows the intended materiality of the building, which is glass and concrete. This is the interior perspective taken from the bar that shows the program of the mine shaft. So you can see the hoist cage here and the glass wall pointing towards the courtyard, which I think has this interesting effect of like almost tunnel-like, going through the program, going through seeing what like the intended views. And the last one is from the outdoor cafe area. So you're kind of seeing the effect of the glass intended view from the outside portion. And from this porch, you can kind of see the rest of the building in the background, which is an interesting effect that I liked. And so here's this supplementary drawing I have, which more clearly shows the goal of this project, showing how each of these rectangular bars point towards intended views and have a controlled effect. So towards the LA, you're going on this outdoor ramp under the trees, which matches with wanting to highlight the vegetation, towards the mine shaft and towards the piers. And finally, I have the model photographs, which I think are really nice to show all of these things I had in mind for the project more clearly. You could see the entrance here from the existing path, the entire model as a whole, and this effect of having the clerestory windows, and the model in plan view with the roof on and roof off. And yeah, I guess that's it for now. Thank you.
You should let Ben go first.
Oh, put me on the spot. This is great. I mean, I think it's a really nice project. I mean, I think an earlier comment that Carrie made, I'm still kind of thinking about this idea of evenness and unevenness. And I think maybe the opposite kind of idea might apply here, just in thinking about the partie. On one hand, it seems like it's difference in need of some regulation, or it could be maybe it needs to be a little bit more excessive in its difference in terms of its partie. There are a couple of interesting features for me that I'll just maybe point out. I don't know, they're not like groundbreaking observations, but like the little ramp at the end of the project, to me, it's sort of like this funky, quirky little kickstand. It's like, you know, I don't really know how to describe it with a vocabulary word, but like more like it's more like a sound. But it's sort of this weird outlier in juxtaposition to like the building itself. And you can either amplify that by sort of talking about its sort of quirkiness, or you might want to think about incorporating it a little bit more. And this is a general comment about just siting. And I've noticed this in a couple of the projects, and I'm always curious in the axons when I see the relationship of like the building facade in relation to the ground. And a number of the projects sort of, and this is not any fault of the studio or your design abilities, but it's just something to maybe attend to. But they look a little bit like they're just sort of plunked down on the site. And you can usually tell by the way that like it's sort of like this arbitrary line almost of like the ground that intersects with the building facade. And so just the way that it's sort of sitting on the ground and its relationship and contact to the ground as a surface could probably use a little bit more resolution. And just an example of a project that I think might be interesting is Grace Farms by Sana, in particular for this project. It could be useful to take a look at. A totally different type of geometry, but it has sort of this meandering kind of characteristic across an undulating landscape. And it might be useful to just take a peek at and get some ideas on siting, as well as the way that form intersects and moves across in sort of a different way than many other buildings do, perhaps.
I was thinking of Grace Farms too, because I think this is the reason I think that. And I like your project in a lot of ways. And I think I have to say, commend you on your presentation. Like I was super convinced by your project by the time we got to the end. I knew like why it was where it is and why you wanted me to move through it in the way you did. And so I really loved a lot of the aspects about what you presented in the work. And it's, I think, very sensitively and well thought out how it engages with the site, which is cool to see. And I for me, it highlighted one of the questions I had with the studio. So this is kind of for everyone too, which is kind of where the agency of your work as an architect is like manifest in the project. And we saw a lot of projects already that would take, as I said, that kind of single figure and then like elaborate on that single figure and kind of like draw out of that single figure, you know, whether it was a surface elaboration or a relationship between column and wall, or a relationship between a kind of clear story and a volume. But there were these like really intricate ways in which you were creating interiors in what was essentially a single figure. What I like about this project and why I think it relates to Grace Farms, because Grace Farm is really, and I mean this in not a negative way, a really like boring building, in that it's like 2 columns and a beam just like repeated across the site. There's like not a lot of elaboration in the way in which the building itself is constructed. And I think this project, in the way you've drawn it, doesn't have some of that like intense elaboration of all the parts that some of your colleagues had, but it doesn't necessarily need that in the same way Grace Farms doesn't, because it's articulated and situated into the site as a kind of a lens or a way, an invitation into the site, right? And that your agency and your intervention as an architect is in the situating of the pavilions and how they string together along this edge, where you enter a box, where you leave a box. And I mean, I think the boxes that you're drawing are you know, doing the work that they need to do. But I see your intelligence in how they're situated, not like say like in the development of the surface or some of the other explorations we've seen throughout the afternoon. So anyway, there's a helicopter coming in above, but maybe you guys hear it. But I'm near a medical center. So but I think this is a really nice project in that way. You know, sometimes I would want to pair students up, like maybe if you could like find a partner in your studio, you guys could have like a really amazing practice. Like you're the partner that like situates projects very carefully in the landscape, and then that's the partner that elaborates the surfaces of all those projects or something. But I think it's a really nice project on those terms.
No matter if there's time, I can make a quick comment.
Yeah.
But if there's not time, that's okay too.
No, please. I only make exceptions for you. Ben, you can hang on for me. Yeah, go.
I'll be quick. Emily, very well drawn, very well represented and documented. I really enjoyed the first series of line drawings, and point you to the kind of degree of nuance that you were able to achieve through the kind of careful control and management of hatch, the scale, the direction, and so forth. And so I sort of was torn with the same dilemma that Ben was, that he, do you push the difference, or do you try to rein it in to greater evenness? And for me, when I was watching you present, and it was sort of at the moment of showing this bottom perspective, where we start to see all of the pieces of the puzzle. And it's nice that it's next to the axon right now, because I think the axon actually suggests where I'm headed with my comment. I think there's opportunity to, and it again, like too much is too much, but perhaps that's also just a sensibility question of how much to push the difference. But I think there's opportunity to distinguish between the sort of tunnels and then the boxes materially. And it can be subtle, or it could be more, the dial of that, I think would need to be studied. And it could even be just sort of within the texture of the concrete itself. But it struck me from that view, that bottom perspective, that there's opportunity there to kind of make more legible, I think, the party of the project. What's sort of the circulation spine versus the sort of exhibition and primary room that are kind of grafting onto them. That I think is coming across in the axon. And that's where I say, I point to your earlier drawings where like there was incredible difference, nuanced difference in, like, let's say how the water was drawn and planned, right? We were starting to see like lots of different directions. But overall, just a really terrific project, really well drawn. I really appreciate the kind of craft in the line drawings, especially.
Thank you so much.
Emily, any other questions before we wrap up?
No, I think that's okay. But yeah, thank you so much for the critique.
Great. Thanks so much, Emily. I think I've been super inconsistent with my wrap-ups, but everyone's doing a great job so far. So thank you, Emily. Let's maybe take, I'm so sorry, but like a 4-minute break. So does 3:30 work for you? All, if that works.
4 is cool.
4 is cool. All right, Ben, it's 3 for you. All right, see you all in a minute. Hey, Joey, you want to start sharing your screen so we can get going?
All right, can you see that?
Yeah, let's give it a minute, but thanks.
Okay.
All right. Why don't you take it away, Joey?
All right. Well, hello, I'm Joey Tomsky, and thank y'all for being here. So in the past few years on Jefferson Island, there has been a significant emphasis on maintaining the vegetation growing around the site itself. And as a result of this careful consideration, the proposal utilizes orientations from 3 levels of the salt mine to create an embedded form to preserve pre-existing trees. And as well, a grid was derived from the grid of the salt mine, which is used to guide interior and exterior conditions. This concrete study model begins to explore the mass of the building. Since the project is embedded into the landscape, 3 different levels were created to follow the elevation change. Here, site analysis conveys the orientations of the salt mine levels a bit clearly. And now looking at this site plan, the approach to the building starts down on the bottom east side of the plan. It starts as a dirt path and slowly becomes a descending ramp that brings you to the 3rd floor courtyard of the building right here. And by enabling the visitor to walk towards the building, they can see the architecture and its interaction with the landscape before entering it. This site section shows how the project flows down the hill in relation to the greater context of the site. And so after stepping off the ramp, the visitor is compressed between 2 entrances to the interior, pushing them to an amphitheater condition on the northern side of the building. And on the right side contains a sequence of private programs, while the space on the left leads to a void that cuts through to the 1st floor with stairs that wrap all the way to the bottom. By following either the voided out stairs, private staircase, or elevator, visitors are taken to the 2nd floor, which contains all public program. And continuing down to the 1st floor, which contains semi-public program, the visitor can finally reach the exhibit space on the west side of the building, which has a break with a seating area to allow the visitor to reflect on the information learned about the history on Jefferson Island. So each floor has different heights relating to its designated program. Starting with the 3rd floor, it's private and has the lowest height. 2nd floor is public and has the most height, and the semi-public 1st floor has a height in between those 2. And the reading area seen here on level 2 is elevated by 1 foot, and the space is continued throughout the exhibition sequence. So this section perspective shows the void cut going through the building, allowing light to travel to the lowest floor and almost recreating the salt mine shaft by exhibiting the salt cage through the center of the space. Here, the site axon conveys the embedded nature of the building and how it interacts with the surrounding vegetation. You can see a glass wall forming, following down the elevation of the landscape. With this first perspective, you can start to understand materiality of the building. It's fully encased with cast in place concrete, while the interior face, the retaining walls, are made of wood harvested from trees that were blown over in past hurricanes, as mentioned when we visited the site. And so the second perspective shows from looking at the top highest elevation down, kind of the building hiding and embracing the surrounding view of the landscape. Perspective showing the courtyard starts to help you understand how this area could be used for a different program outside. And a perspective from level 2, the public space. Note the materiality on the different sides of the walls. Getting to the model photos, this shows the model in full context of the landscape. Here's more of a close-up view of the lighting effects from the windows that follow the landscape. A picture of level 2 with no roof, kind of showing the scale with scale figures inside. A shot down the ramp leading to the entry sequence of the building. And finally, a picture of level 1 with no roof to show the delicate nature of the exhibit space. And the final drawing conveys what the building could look like once it has been fully encased in the vegetation it tries to preserve. Thank you.
Quick clarifying question, Joey. Beautiful project, beautifully drawn. Oh my goodness, so many things to say. But I have a question. The axon is showing the geometry of the intersecting, well, like the moment where they all come together, that center as like orthogonal. But then in the plans, it showed it as kind of skewed. Which one is correct?
I'm sorry, which space?
Maybe I need to annotate it.
You have
like
parallelogram
here.
stairs, which is like a secret dream of every architect. But
So like in the axon, that looks like a square, but then in the plans, it looks like, yeah, like a diamond, like a parallelogram.
Okay, let me go up to zoomed in view of it. It's supposed to be a parallelogram.
Okay.
What did you, this is great. I think it's a really nice project. What did you learn from the sand and concrete model?
Yeah, so that was helping me understand the pulling out the side of the project. Originally, before my mid-review, I had a complex stair system running around the sides of it. And so I wanted to understand how I could pull from the side of the project to create a more seamless entrance to the building.
Okay. I mean, I think it's a really intuitive approach to a model, honestly. And I think it's a good exercise because, you know, it's really difficult to actually create landscape with a museum board or, you know, foam models. And I think it's like, you know, it's a rough model, but like it really works to your advantage, I think, to the study of site and land. And so I think that there's a lot of intelligence you can pull from that and learn that gets kind of represented or recast through the design. I agree that the drawings are really nice and clear, and you know, it looks like yeah, I'm looking at the overgrown elevation. Can you just describe what the kind of the goal of that drawing is?
Right. So this is kind of like an imaginative drawing that I created. And so I was kind of focusing on drawing vines, kind of or abstracted vines growing around the edges of the building itself.
Yeah,
And kind of blending it in. Sorry.
I'm assuming you're familiar with the work of Junya Ishigami.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, there's some good cues there, and I think that the light-handedness of the way that Ishigami uses kind of foliage to enliven the drawing is a good approach, and it works well with your scheme and ideas about the overgrown nature of the work. And I would continue to push that a little bit. I mean, I think where it sort of falls a little short for me, and again, like these are nitpicky things, you know, but I think in what would seems almost like it's a section. Like it's like this kind of intensity and densification of the foliage. And I wonder if it needs to be a little bit more loose. Like it seems like constrained in that moment. And it sort of recasts the looseness that I think is really kind of serendipitous and kind of whimsical, I suppose, in Ishigami's work. So just a thought, but a nitpicky comment. but it's a really good approach.
Thank you.
I like the project quite a lot as well. And for me, my comment is really about what I see as a kind of double reading in the project in a way that maybe unlocks certain possible unarticulated potential. But it's basically a kind of a bar building that has like a kind of kink in the middle in one reading. And that's the kink that Carrie was asking about that I'm also like really fascinated by as a kind of this kind of like knuckle or this kind of like tangle in the middle of the project that really activates like the two ends of the bar. And one of the things, you know, I kept thinking as you were presenting that you should just continue to double down on the very simple kinked bar logic of the project and not add these like massive ramps or the massive stairs that like show up on the I don't know if that's north, but on the north side of the project. But then I started thinking the reason you have this like kind of massive approach ramp and the stairs is because of the duality that you're exploring between surfaces that are programmatic building surfaces and surfaces that are landscape surfaces. And you get this kind of like terracing of a building, but you also get this terracing of a landscape. And I think that's something that you're trying to capture in that last drawing when you're describing it to Ben. But I think that these surfaces that are the landscape surfaces are still a little bit falling short. I mean, I like the project overall, but it seems like those surfaces, instead of right now being these kind of white concrete, either uninhabited surfaces that are just rooftops or inhabited forecourts, could be something that's like a little bit more of the landscape and not like separate from the landscape or separate from the site. And I'm not quite sure why you couldn't necessarily occupy some of those surfaces as terraces, and then you would have almost like the shuffling of a card deck or something. You would have like some surfaces that are landscape occupied, some surfaces that are program occupied, some surfaces that are landscape occupied as you make your way down the side of the hill. And I think you would, you would get maybe like a multiplicity of experiences in the project instead of something that's a little bit more directed in the way that you describe it now. And I think, again, I'm not saying redraw the project or anything. I think that's in the project as a potential, which is one reason I like it. I just want you to maybe see that a little bit more decisively.
Yeah, I'll just add a quick comment because I think Ben and Troy have made the smart comments about the project. So I'll just put on the kind of representation digital media hat for a second. Joey, I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of your work. And I also direct my students, say, go look at Joey's drawings. They're incredible. But when I look at this collection of really accomplished representations, it strikes me as all over the place a little bit, right? So we have Ishigami, we have moss, we have the kind of Hockney water representation. So where is Joey in that? And I would say just like, as you move forward into, next semester and beyond, that's where I wonder, like, where is your kind of authorship in that, or where is your personality kind of coming through? And maybe it's in like the lower elevation drawing of the kind of, you called that speculative, where you were starting to like draw into the overgrownness of the landscape. And I when I look at, and I know I'm familiar with your earlier work, so I would say like that drawing is perhaps consistent with some of your like very kind of subtle but highly detailed and intricate like line drawings. Like maybe that's you, maybe that's not you, maybe you're excited about departing from that. I don't know. But I just encourage you to kind of like navigate within all of these, like you're so skilled, right? You're so skilled at also representing in this variety, this range, that I wonder where you are in that too. And so how do you navigate these skills and then find your own voice through it?
Joey, anything else before we move on?
No, I really appreciate all the feedback you guys gave me. Thank you.
Great. Joey, I feel like you're just a big sponge, and over the semester you've just soaked in so much. And so I think Carrie's comment is a very fair comment, and I really look forward to see how you kind of progress in your career, and to one day say, oh, that's definitely a drawing drawn
Joey
by.
drawing.
Exactly, a Joey drawing, exactly. And then Ben, you were asking about the concrete models. That's something I learned from Troy that Joey and I got to work on together. So there you go. We're keeping it in the family.
I love the
Asking.
multi-generational review here that's happening.
Makes me feel embarrassingly old.
No.
Someone so wise could have been my student. Yeah.
No, that's not the case at all. All right, Matt, take it away.
Hi. Just want to thank you all for coming while I share my screen. Okay. So I chose site 3 for my project, Water's Edge, and I call it this attractive container. And the project sits atop of the Water's Edge, access to remnants of the old railway, and it incorporates natural light through the use of subtractive courtyards in the form of ellipses scattered throughout one room of open circulation and program. Said circulation and program is then wrapped around these courtyards to maximize the effect of the courtyard to the user. Furthermore, as the user travels throughout, a new potential destination is always visible, immediately stepping away from the user's previous destination. And this is something that you can see in my concept plan on the left right here. All these viewpoints, and as soon as you step out of the direction, you immediately see where you're going to go next. And then considering all of this, the design is a neutral container that has whimsical moments to keep the user engaged and enthusiastic about the site. So one of the things that are that I studied about the site is the vegetation and the topography of the site. And I use this to determine like key viewpoints that I would want my building to show. And these two key viewpoints are can be seen in my plan. It's the two corners where the reading room and the cafe are. So this is where the view is not obstructed by vegetation or canopy. And something else that here, if I take it to my plan, something else that's I like about my project is that I use the salt wall to also display exhibits and program, and it's scattered throughout my plan. And this is something that can be really seen in my perspective. All these salt walls scattered. And so for my reading room, which you can see in this perspective, since the concept is an open room and open circulation, I kind of thought that maybe a reading room is something that's a little bit more private and requires a little bit more concentration. So in order to like kind of keep a balance between this open room idea and this fact itself, I decided to create the wall to be slatted so that it's not entirely like creating this idea of separation, but still has that effect. And then something else that I did to incorporate natural light is I have these extrusions, and these extrusions can be seen in my plan. So it's like the video room, and then the office, and the bathroom, and this area right here. And these extrusions are letting in natural light at the point that it extrudes past the ceiling, past top level. And I think that is everything. Here's an outside perspective to see like what it would look like from the outside and in relation to the site. And then here's like some of that glass like that I was talking about past the the roof. And then something else that I did is in my offices. So there's a courtyard in the middle of the set of offices, but then also at their desk, they have a window so they can see actually outdoors in both directions. Yeah. And that's my project.
Thank you, Matt.
And if you want to take a look at my model as well, here's like what it would look like with the roof on, and then the roof off.
How did you decide on the spacing of the ellipses next to each other? Like whether they were like when they were too close together and then when they were too far apart? So it seems like you have a, because it's, I'll ask it very quickly, because it seems like you have a really defined problem in your project. You have a perimeter and you have the objects inside, and then you have to negotiate the spacing of the objects in relation to each other and the spacing of the objects that are these ellipses in relation to the perimeter. So maybe you could, and then that's your space making device. So how did you do that?
So I kind of thought about natural light and the way that it would hit the design when I was placing my ellipses. So like I kind of wanted to block natural light from going into the natural light coming from the south in the north direction. So like, because like that's typically like glary and hot. So I wanted to keep that and then push program and open space to the opposite side where there's more gentle light and it wasn't as distracting. So that's where I kind of thought about placing the ellipses. Yeah.
I think you could exaggerate that difference more, both programmatically and also if you're trying to make your composition like respond to the site. So there's no reason why these things couldn't get so close together that they, they almost like brush elbows, and at some point times they could be spaces between them that like span even further to allow for maybe different kinds of like collective inhabitation, right? So groups together. So I think that I think that I like the strategy. I'm a little bit suspicious, though, I have to say, of the evenness with which it like plays out across the plate and as an extension of the site. I mean, maybe some of the answer could be also how the perimeter actually engages the site. So some of the spaces that we understand as edges are actually more just like thresholds that engage like larger areas outside of the project, which to me might be like another answer to that problem. But I think there's a lot of potential in the system that you've developed, and I would think you could push it. I know it's like the final review, but I think you could push that. It's a field condition, and in my experience, like a field condition, one of the problems that you engage in that when you inhabit a system like this is how you produce difference within the self similarity. And so that's why I'm going to that question.
I think that's a really important, oops, sorry.
No, go for it, Ben.
Okay. I think that's a really important observation, like the field condition of the project. And it makes me think of the tension of the edge in De Stijl painting. So like Mondrian versus Van Doesburg, and Hayduk writes about this. But I think like the significance of the field is the implication of what exceeds the canvas, the implication of a field that exceeds the boundaries of the canvas. And so how you brush up against the edge of the building with the ellipses is as important as the ellipses themselves, if that's a point of intrigue in the work. So it's tricky, so on one hand, do you break the boundary of the edge of the building, or does the building become the edge that subdivides the ellipses? You're subtracting the ellipses right now with the edges of the building, and it implies a field that extends beyond the edge of the envelope. And so, but I think you can amplify that with greater sort of kind of clarity maybe of the relationship between these two objects and the field. And I don't know, I mean, it may be useful, maybe not, but I think to me, the importance of the field is the way that it implies what is not shown in the scene. Does that make sense? I don't know if I sort of feel like I'm talking myself into a trap, but I hope that makes sense. But I think it's a really neat project, and there's obvious references again to Sana. I think like the Rolex Learning Center, perhaps. I don't know if that came up in your discussions, but to me, there's some obvious ones there. The one thing that I think is maybe a little bit underexplored is the section, and I think that could be elevated. I know that the kind of the ellipses, the way that they perforate the ceiling plane, start to suggest sectional moves, but I think that could be more rigorously explored potentially, or even just the way that there's more than one sort of dominant like plane of occupation in the building. So something to think about, but I think it's a really nice project.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to both of these comments. And my comment is along the same lines. I read a kind of an indifference to the site that I think in this semester, especially, is a missed opportunity. The project is sort of could be anywhere, right? But I think, Ben, you brought up Rolex, so let's talk about that. I mean, look it up. It actually has like topographic interior, right? And so maybe that's one way to kind of warp your ground to kind of strengthen the relationship that the project has. Maybe less so with the sort of history of the site, but the existing kind of topographic conditions of the site could be one opportunity to sort of break the neutrality that I think exists in your project.
But yeah,
otherwise,
I absolutely agree that maybe flowing with the topography is something that can make my project more interesting and exploring like what these different levels have to offer. I think that's something.
But I mean, there's a distinction there. Like, it's not to make the project more interesting. It's to make the project have a stronger relationship to the ground, right? And I think that qualification is important to register.
Yeah, right now you've highlighted these little points in the section. You're clearly articulating it as separate from the ground, like you've created a second ground, which is one direction the section kind of has, like an object floating on a hilltop. But the plan suggests a kind of engagement with landscape that is working against the way you're drawing the section right now, which I think is one reason why Carrie and Ben are bringing up that project in Switzerland, because it's clearly articulated as like an extension of like a landscape construction, right? Where you're articulating building as object. And so I think that's one of the key decisions you have to make in the project, is whether or not you want to continue to double down on that relationship, or the break in that relationship, or you want to connect it.
Great. Matt, did you have any other kind of questions before we move on?
No, I think we covered everything. Thank you guys for your input and for coming out today.
Also look at Haydock's diamond projects. Yeah. That's it.
Thanks so much. Matt, you sounded like a rock star. Thanks for coming out tonight.
Well, architecture is like a funny thing. In architecture school, one of my students pointed this out to me a couple years ago. It's one of the few institutions where you invite people from all over, and instead of having me present about my work, you all present your work to me as students. I think there's a funny inversion there in the way knowledge production works in architecture school. So you guys kind of are the rock stars today. It's kind of cool to see what you're doing.
Great.
Love that.
Thanks so much, Matt. Sabrina, you ready to go?
I am indeed.
Great. And then
My
let's
name
try
is
to,
Sabrina. Oh yes,
sorry. Let's just try to hit it around like 3 minutes for the presentation part.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
You know I run long, so I appreciate the comment. Thank you all for being here. I am working on sharing my screen. Here we are. Okay, you're able to see?
Mm-hmm.
In the year 1980, the ecology, industry, geology, and history of Jefferson Island changed drastically. As an oil rig pierces the salt dome, water floods the mine cavity, dissolving the salt and creating a massive sinkhole. Years of undisturbed sediment loosens and particle by particle subsides down a newly formed hillside. As water pulls sediment into the void, this surge is so powerful that the southern running bayous turn north, and for a brief moment in time, the vortex is visible as a 200-foot waterfall in the middle of what was once a 30-foot lake at its deepest. After the cavity is filled to a satisfying point, the mud settles and once more, and the even surface of water blankets this violent change in depth below. Unlike the industrial hill, whose remnants of the salt mine company and rail line remain visible, the geological and hydrological changes in this site underwent during the disaster remain buried beneath. This is an exploded kind of section axonometric showing each of the elements that are subsiding down the hillside, also with color gradation. At the top is roof. This piece here is the office, kitchen, meeting space, and then storage and mechanical, lobby, cafe, gift shop, gallery spaces, and archives, then leading you to the final exhibition space, which is the massive salt wall. It was interesting figuring out how this building was going to sit in the land, as the topographic lines or the existing pathway allow you to have multiple levels that this central level leading in for public space, which is the gallery area, roof, and this is the private space, which is office. This pathway exists from the industrial, leading from the industrial site onto here. And below it is the mechanical and storage area that's connected by an elevator shaft, which also leads you into the gallery spaces, the subsiding gallery spaces. This design, which follows an elusive narrative, is an illusion itself in that it is a rectangle from plan, but as we continue to descend down, these aggregates fall as well with the land, which was an interesting issue to figure out how to make your building subside down a hillside that is steep, steep enough for ramps to maybe not be able to dig into the land. So I went backwards and then back down. And at the final arrival, this full salt wall space is around 25 feet, which is one of the smaller spaces that the actual salt mine would have exhibited. So as well, the aggregates that are punctured through the wall create views that are specific as you're subsiding down the landscape. And this is a site model showing a milled out version of these topographic lines. Thank you.
Quick question: Is the project on concept board the same project that is in the presentation you just gave?
It is not. It has some of the similar elements.
Okay. This is what we should focus on though. When you're showing up. Yeah. Is there maybe go to like either a section or an axon or a plan or something? Okay, yeah. Okay. What would you say like your primary kind of goal with the work is? If you had to say like my project is this, like what would its name be?
Originally at midterm, my concept was subsidence, and I still am sticking with that kind of concept. And I liked the 3 words that were included in the beginning of this prompt, which were to be on, in, and over the land. And so I tried to consider how to work with the topography to do all 3 of those things so that the land sits in many different ways.
Okay. So, but when you say subsidence, what do you mean? Like, I know it in the New Orleans context, we're sinking, but in this context, is that what it means also? Or is like the building meant to be sort of like the sunken artifact?
So each of the aggregates that are in plan that seem to fall away, this is lobby space, and as you're descending down each of these ramp spaces, these are descending or subsiding exhibition areas. This being the highest space, which is where the mine shaft is, so that it is the tallest and most narrow space, so you feel that you're almost going down as this was meant to be used.
Okay, cool. I probably will need to think a little bit more before I can articulate something with real value probably for you. But I think that there's a lot of like intriguing kind of ideas in the work. And I think they could be pushed with more sort of exploration, like almost like to the point of obsession. Like, what does it mean that a building subsides? And I think that's a really provocative statement. And then if you layer in, on, in, over, I think then that gives you almost a vocabulary for qualities. So then how can you start to articulate when something is on, when something is in, when something is over, and then you sort of create this graphic language or formal language that is sort of a proof of concept for those maybe intellectual motives. But I think like there's a lot of good ideas. I have a little bit of a difficult time right now sort of seeing them in the execution of the project, but it doesn't mean that it's not a good project by any stretch. So I think it's working. It just could be a little bit clearer, I think, to match the concept with the proof, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Sabrina. There's some really strong qualities to the project, but also some substantial questions that I have. Well, now that we're on this plan, maybe some of those are cleared up, but maybe not. This gray moment, like kind of bifurcating the 2 halves, is that where the public enters the building?
It's not. This is a veranda off of the entryway. This is entryway.
That's entryway.
Yes, this is exterior. So this is the same color as the roof plane, or was supposed to be.
But you showed in the earlier plan of the higher space in another entry at the top. And it struck me as super curious because it seemed like you were proposing this public entry, but it was really the kind of space that was there was like the office space. But maybe I just misinterpreted that, and this is the public entry. And either way, I think providing sort of two entries like that, if that is the case, 2 entries to the project. How do I know which one to go in, right? Like that's a big question. It's sort of like, if you're going to kind of stratify circulation based on user type, how do you make that, like, how through design, what are the devices to make that apparent to the visitor?
Yes, originally the idea was that because the entry in the center for visitors was because this pathway extends from the visitor center that already exists on the Jefferson Island site. And opposing on the other side of this building is the hilltop, which is where the industrial site is. And so the larger loop that is on the entire site, that is the pre-existing pathway, it makes a circle. And people are already naturally directed with the visitor center to move like
well, that, I mean, that helps clarify. That's something that you'd want to illuminate in a site plan, and then quickly kind of discuss it and move on. But like the project is my other comment is that the project has very little space and a whole lot of circulation. So is there opportunity to like merge some of those so that perhaps like exhibition occurs within the space of circulation, and so forth? Because I'm just looking at, this plan, the lower square, right? Like 3/4 or more of the space is actually taken up by ramp. And so, what is the value of that? And I don't even really kind of even see sort of like opportunities to like get glimpses or peaks. Maybe an interesting moment would be like, okay, if you're really wanting to like get people to like march down the like Mayan temple, you kind of got to give them like little teasers along the way to like keep them going. So are there windows along that ramp? I guess that's what you're trying to point to now.
Right. On the concept board, there is I believe perspective in there that's, oh, well, it's not showing the kind of subsiding, but yes, that's the point of these punctures through the walls, is as you're falling down, because they're crossing over each other. There's moments where you're walking and you get peaks of the salt wall, and you continue walking, and each of those frames is different because they are crisscrossing rather than being horizontal to each other.
I'm pleased to hear that, but at the same time, I always tell my students, if you don't represent it, like it's not really there. And so like to add deliberateness to that move, you would follow up with like a perspective that, substantiates that like kind of move through the view that offers that glimpse. So I think there's some clarity missing in the project, but it seems like there's also a lot of ideas, and there's actually a lot of development, but perhaps not sort of developed equivalently through the different modes of representation.
I like a lot of the insight in this project. I think you want to make, I was thinking while Carrie was talking about the different entrances, and this kind of feeds into maybe my critique of the building, which is mostly like a kind of design suggestion than like a conceptual critique or anything. But I feel like you want to make like 5 buildings that there's a lot of representation that's not the plans that tries to draw these as like 5 pavilions that are like slowly sinking in the mud at different rates, or have different kinds of buoyancies, maybe floating up out of the mud, just like Stealth Dome does. And then in the plan, they become locked into this like really taut, like rectangular bar. And some of the question of the circulation is another question I think Carrie's putting on the table, which I think is a really smart one. And I keep wondering if what if there were like 6 entrances, and actually to get from the purple to the orange, you actually have to leave the building and then walk back into the building like through another door. And some of that ramping that does seem to me to be excessive on the interior actually happens like as some kind of experience of the site or the landscape in order for you to negotiate the hillside. Because yeah, the idea that, you know, also the way you color code the plan and the way you so much of how you articulate the project to me suggests you should have yeah, separate pavilions, and they could be a little bit more free of each other, and then they could intersect and interact in, I think, a little bit more ways that fit some of the character of what you're describing, rather than like this kind of precision of the rectangle.
Great. I think that's a great place to kind of end. Sabrina, any questions before we wrap up? I just muted you, so you might have to unmute yourself. Sorry, there was kind of feedback.
No worries. I think those are fantastic. And originally, it's interesting. I had at mid-review, my building was a bunch of these aggregates that fell and went in. And for some reason, I felt that I needed to somehow organize it a little bit differently by putting it all in one space. But to go back and think about how to make these more merge those two ideas would be interesting. So I really appreciate that perspective on the subsiding. I think you called them like the pavilions. So thank you. That's fantastic.
Great. Thanks so much, Sabrina. Brendan, you're up next.
All right, I will share my screen real quick.
And then students like about 3 minutes for presentations, and I'm gonna I might have to be, I don't know, interrupting a little bit more just so that we all get off on time. So sorry.
All right, can you guys see it okay?
Yep.
Great. So hello, my name is Brendan Cook, and this is my project, Journey to the Center of the Earth, patent pending. The first stage of this project was site analysis, in which I mapped out sun path, tree placement, and wind direction disruption to find where in the area is best for climactic comfort. This revealed Site 3 to be among the best locations, which is perfect because Site 3 was already my top choice. On the tip of the peninsula sits the proposed building, taking a spiral shape that maximizes views while referencing the historic importance of the sinkhole. Moving to site section, we can see that this building descends into the ground, evoking the experience of descending into the salt mine. In plan, the visitor enters through this curtain wall in the front here before squeezing past the salt cage that occupies a double height volume and entering into the spiral, which opens up with a curtain wall to reveal the view of the lake and the landscape that is down to the south. They pass by a collection of artifacts as they descend the ramp, stepping off onto each platform to view each one, which culminates in the salt wall at the very end before entering one last tight squeeze past the video room and into the cafe with seating around that double height volume and hoist cage. Just like in the actual salt mine, this hoist cage punctuates user experience. Exiting out of the building and spiraling back up the side, now we can see that in Axon, it is revealed that the breaks in the curtain wall mirror the location of the trees, which helps to tie the two experiences together despite their wildly contrasting contexts. At the end, the visitor rather, enters the courtyard, which is protected from the oncoming winds and shaded from the sun, which makes it perfect as an event space, family gathering area, or as an outdoor classroom. Viewing the building as an unrolled section reveals almost all the rooms and all the artifacts, which include artifacts from the Chitimachan tribe, including this canoe and some basket weaving, arrows, and some of their main agricultural products, endangered species of the area, such as the rattlesnake and the bear, and as well as just the main relics from the salt mine, including a map of nearby salt domes, a mine cart, and salt wall. Picking up the pace a little in this more traditional section, we can see that double height volume that the salt cage occupies, as well as the cafe space and some of these artifacts. And in the section perspective, we can see some of the surrounding landscape and how the building sits on and in it, as well as the excavated terrain for the courtyard and that exit ramp. In the perspectives, it reveals the material choice of terracotta, which has the earthy tones that help to kind of immerse the visitor in the experience underground, as well as stand out from the lush landscape as the tip of the peninsula is fully visible from the existing event space in Cafe Jefferson, which helps invite visitors to the site to see it and want to explore it more and see that rich history of Jefferson Island. These perspectives for reference are from the looking over that retaining wall into the courtyard. This is the first artifact you see as you pass the check-in desk, and these are the final artifacts. The model for me was just a whole bunch of firsts. The building was 3D print out of plastic in 2 pieces. Getting them to sit right together is a huge challenge. And the actual site was constructed out of coffee stained paper mache on a rib style cutout. I think it turned out pretty well, and it taught me a lot about the possibilities and opportunities of model making, as well as plenty of the challenges. And of course, wouldn't be an ANWAR section presentation without a fantastical drawing. So for your consideration, Journey to the Center of the Galaxy.
I love this thing.
Thank you.
I love this project.
Very cool.
It's fantastic. The last drawing that you showed, I think, doesn't do it justice, actually. I mean, I think the spirit of the drawing is right, but I think I would, rather than like the center of the galaxy, I think of it more as like the graphicness of it. Like, to me, I get super excited about like the graphic plan. And I immediately started thinking of references to Paulo Peralta, the skateboarding company that I loved in the 80s. And I don't know if you know that skate company, but you should look up their logo. It's like kind of your project in a nutshell. But I love this thing. The partie is super clear. I'm a little concerned about the little weird curlicue in the partie diagram. I don't really understand that one in relation to the actual building plan. So I'd maybe readjust that, although you probably have a logic there that I'm not reading in the paragraph. I think it's so close to being really, really excellent. I think the drawings that sort of close it down for me a little bit are the perspectives. And I think that they're close. I mean, I love the beige. Like, I mean, I think the beigeness of it is really working in your favor. But I think it can be more banal. You know, I think it could even be more banal. And the figures sort of are too offsetting from the beigeness of the perspective. So I would rework the scale figures in there. And the plan, I mean, I loved the partie, but then I got to the plan and I was like, oh yeah. Like, you're pulling at my heartstrings. One of my favorite Hayduck projects is the Inhabitant Who Refused to Participate. And I'd recommend looking that thing up because it's like these cellular individuated rooms but it's more sectional. But you're doing sectional through like the long drawn out kind of sloping curlicue. And there's something about that, just sort of the dogmatic nature of like singular thing, singular thing, singular thing. And it's highly conceptual, but it's also really interesting to think about like a museum experience through the construction of a narrative as you could walk through this education center, and how like the narrative could be played out through the circulation of the rooms in this sort of sequence and growing kind of unfolding of something. And so the relationship to like mystery or thinking or whatever it is, like however you want to think about it, but like the narrative of the exhibition or the education center kind of comes to mind. And then lastly, one of the things that I really love, and I'm sure this is intentional, but like in your section perspective, I love that one. I love this moment here. And it sort of just brings it all home for me about like the intentionality. I love that. So I love thinking about like the hard edge of this thing as this sort of undulating, or like not undulating, but it's kind of like mobilized surface that's bad words I'm using right now, so forgive them. But I love that sort of intersection and the kiss between the building and the ground, and sort of the exposure of their difference. So I'll stop there, but I think it's a fantastic project.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I really like this project as well. And I think there's something really provocative about the spiral and your kind of imagination of the spiral, especially like as it relates to like, yeah, the as you have indicated, the drilling into the earth. I guess you have a hurricane there too, which is maybe some other kind of collective project you all are sublimating into the work as well. But so I think that there's I was actually, I'm interested in Ben's comment about it being graphic. I was actually thinking that one of the things that I would suggest focusing on is the actual tectonic articulation of the parts. To me, there's a little bit of ambiguity. I think that section that you were showing is a good place to see it, or in that perspective view from the landscape. I mean, I guess it's graphic, or there's also some kind of like land art references, like you could imagine some like Donald Judd or Robert Smithson kind of work operating like this. But I thought the potential of the way in which the spiral works is, it would be nice if the roof was like somehow part of your, especially when I saw that kind of whimsical last slide, if the roof was somehow part of your imagination of this thing. Right now it's a kind of twisted box with like no detail and like no difference. I mean, there's a few places where it kind of ruptures, but it seems like you could take a relatively simple, in the way you've taken a relatively simple bar building and twisted it, you could take a relatively simple roof idea or roof intersecting with wall idea, and look how that plays out along the straight and along the curve. And I think there would be some really interesting potential that would open up for you. I find it a little bit unsatisfying how kind of monolithic the building is at that scale, for all the richness that kind of unpacks across the site and across the kind of plan making in the section.
Yeah, no, I think it was something we talked about, like almost one of the very last desk grits. Well, maybe not almost the very last, but kind of the last one where we were making design changes was a kind of occupiable roof, skylights, all that stuff. And it got to the point where it's just running out of time,
Yeah.
It is something that I would love to explore.
I'm actually suggesting the opposite though. Like, I guess
okay.
I've seen a lot of occupied roof kind of skylight projects in the studio so far, but this is such an expressive form that I imagine you could have a roof that's like, is it like a vault, or is it like a gable, or does it have some kind of
I see.
quality to it that it's not necessarily occupiable, but is like operating in a slightly more expressive way. That, again, this is more of a design. I don't know conceptually why I think this, but I think there's a lyrical quality to the way in which you presented the project that I think the kind of seriousness of the tectonic expression in the walls and the roof, I think belies a little bit of the sense of humor in the spirit of the way you presented the project.
Great. Any kind of final comments before we wrap up?
Maybe just one quick one. Can you zoom in on this image since we're on it right now? Can you zoom in on that?
Which one? The top one?
The lower right.
Boy.
Yeah, this is again super nitpicky, but in the same interest I had in the sectional intersection of the geometry of the building with the land, this I don't like. I mean, this is preference, but like this vertical line right here, it'd be nicer, I think, if it was like just a conflict of geometries rather than like kind of trying to refine the resolution. It's a super nitpicky thing, but I think it's those kinds of moments where you have such a singular expression in the geometry, like you have to be really attentive to those kinds of moments and the details of the ways that geometry starts to intersect with one another.
Yeah, makes sense.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Brendan. And
thank you all. Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much.
Shane, you want to share the screen?
Yeah, sure. Can everyone see?
Yep.
Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Shane Curtis. Thank you guys for devoting your time to our review today. My structure was, it's on site 4, the piers. It shows the piers for a couple of reasons. I noticed that when we got to Jefferson Island, there was a lot of like, at least in my opinion, there's a lot of like exploring to be done on the island between like botanical gardens and like kind of just exploring like the nature around. And I wanted to continue that on the lake, which is kind of leads me to my first plan here. Here we go. Yeah. As you see, you come down the I don't know what you want to call this piece of land right here, and kind of leading on with that theme that I wanted to take of like discovery and all that, loop around the entire building to the front door here, making sure that you kind of get a good look out at the lake and kind of really feel for where you are. Down to the sections, you can kind of see more or less the same thing. The building does go down a little bit, trying to give you like that like expansion kind of feeling that you're no longer in the same place as like, you're no longer connected to land, but yet you are, if that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, there's another section here kind of showing the different angles of, the other way the building is cut. Took a lot of inspiration from the Fested Landscape building, like the sauna that was in the middle of the lake. I thought that was very unique, how it had the similar kind of dock where it bled out from land to the middle of the water, and yet it was a whole different experience. If we move to my perspectives, I'll start with this one. You can kind of see what I was going for a little bit, where you have the dock here and it looks out onto the water past, everything else. And the same view, it's the same from the inside and outside. Just try to continue that. The axon, I can show really quick. It was right here. You can see you come in, loop around the back, and the doors would be right here. Lastly, I guess I could show off the exploded axon fantastical drawing. And I just wanted to use this drawing as a way to really explode, but really show what each, layer of each element was.
Great. Thank you, Shane.
Before we kind of discuss the project, I have an overarching comment, which is, a very respected critic in past teaching, once said to his students, it was advice to the whole studio, was draw like you give a damn, and you're putting on the reviewers the same kind of command that they must give a damn as well. And I'll often return to that because it applies not only just to the drawing, but the rigors and crafts with which we present our work. And I think that extends as well to the way we kind of align our drawings like we give a damn. Because I have to say, Shane, what's on here looks like you don't give a damn. So why should I give a damn? Right? Like nothing's formatted. Nothing, there's no scale indicated anywhere. Your scale of poche in your plan is so far out of scale that it's no longer effective as a communicant of cut mass, right? And I think there's kind of a disregard for the language that we deploy in architecture, which is the common language that we can all kind of get behind to read the work. So I'm having a hard time kind of getting into the project because of the sort of for lack of a better kind of phrase, the lack of giving a damn in this presentation. So, I mean, I don't know if you have any words that you want to respond to that. You certainly don't have to. But I am disappointed to see the work over, like drawings overlapping, drawings misaligned, a complete disregard for the format and the template that has been provided to you. I'll stop it there.
I don't really have any words, no, but thank you.
I'll try to jump in here. I mean, I think precision is really important, right? I mean, like the way that we communicate is through aspects of precision, and line weights and things like that matter, literally. Like they matter for how we understand, like sentence structure and by using letters and things like that. So you want to make sure that you attend to that. But looking at the building, maybe can you just say in like 2 or 3 words, what is like the motivation of the building? I care a lot about the ideas and stuff like that. So like just 2 to 3 words about motivation for the building is really helpful for me to start to unpack what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, if I could use like 1 or 2 words to kind of sum up motivation, I would say like exploration or discovery, I guess.
Okay. So then where does that occur in the building? You know what I'm saying? So like, is it characterized by the way in which the building intersects with the landscape, or is it characterized by the way in which the program has been configured so that we discover like a curated exhibition and the meaning behind it? Does discovery occur through the way that you draw and model and represent? So I think discovery occurs at many different levels and layers within the scope of a project. And so do you mean that in the context of the building itself, in the way that you work on the building, or the way that maybe like narrative is achieved in the experience of the building?
I would say it's mostly in kind of the way I built it, or the way I kind of went about the whole process. Like going back to like the part where you have like the dock or the deck, I guess, that like goes around the entire building, like getting in like an opportunity to leave land, go on like water and have a different experience and yet still be in the same place.
Yeah. So I mean,
looks a little bit. Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
No, I'll stop. Go ahead.
I mean, I understand. A lot of the comments. I would think it looks a little bit like a houseboat. This project, like literally. I don't know if you guys are in Louisiana, so we're neighbors, so you guys know what houseboats are in Louisiana. It looks like a kind of houseboat. To me, there's like something kind of very default in this, like in the right hands could be like a good thing about the project, but I'm not sure how much intentionality is in the narrative behind this. But it looks like there's a kind of default, like almost like a mobile home or like houseboat way in which everything has been laid out. And like it could have been made somewhere and kind of like dragged to the site and like launched in the water, and then we could like sail out on a voyage across the lake or something. I mean, if that's the like intentionality, then I think you probably would present it, to Ben's categories, like you'd present it through narrative and not so much through the like articulation of it as a kind of object. I mean, a houseboat has like ways in which you can see out on all sides too. And so I think in that way, it's like it is hard to evaluate its relationship to land or its relationship to like tectonics, because there's a very, very much hard to read your intentionality. There's like a little bit of a default way in which things are laid out in these like kind of boxes that accumulate on a raft. And it's also hard then in the way you presented to some of Carrie's points to like, if you want to lay it out, and there is a project actually in architecture that'll let you design houseboats that could be launched, but it was really hard to see in your narrative that that's necessarily the intentionality that you might have meant in your presentation either.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to kind of wrap up. Shane, did you have any questions for the critics before we move on?
No, thank you guys for your time.
All right, thanks, Shane. All right, we have our last project. Naomi, you want to take it away?
Yeah, let me just share my screen. One sec. Okay, can everyone hear me and see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Naomi Smith, and thank you for being here today. On Jefferson Island, there is a massive shift in scale between the surface conditions and the underground mining system and salt dome geology, which Professor Norman touched on, and is shown here with the drawing of the
Naomi,
underground.
can you just hit Control L just so you can? Oh, is it not work? It's fine.
It's not work. I tried. That's why I took a second. Is there another way?
Maybe just hit the little arrow button right here just to maximize a little bit more of the drawing space.
If you go to view and then go to display mode, you can put it in full screen.
Oh, perfect.
I think
Full
that's the
screen mode.
same. I think that's the Control L that Carrie mentioned. Maybe zoom in a little bit.
Okay.
It doesn't work on some of the machines if they only have one screen, I think. I've seen this in my students.
I'm so
Sorry
sorry.
to interrupt you, Naomi.
No, it's okay. I know I've seen.
I also had the same problem. Control L wouldn't work, but I just clicked on the full screen mode and it worked.
Okay. Is that better?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so this drawing highlights the shift in scale with the underground salt dome topography drawn with the overlapping grids of the salt mine, all placed on Lake Pinure, or I guess underneath. Sorry, I lost my place. All right, this proposal consists of 3 aggregates connected by a path that follows the former location of the railroad line on Jefferson Island and connects to an existing system of pedestrian footpaths. Referencing these overlapping grids, this proposal aims to bridge these layers that are otherwise invisible when visiting the site, as if pillars from the mine below were extruded up through the surface in opposition with the mine shaft, which punctures the ground plane and extends 1,500 feet below. This section shows just the top layer of the mine in relation to the buildings, connected to the surface by this mine shaft. So here you can see it in axonometric. I'm going to move to the roof plan. The roof plan shows this overlapping grid system in relation to the mine shaft, which is presented so visitors can peer down into its vastness. A visitor is intended to enter from what is the right side of this plan, first encountering a compressed space between 2 walls and then 2 volumes, which then opens into a viewing platform across from the exposed mine shaft outside the main exhibition building, which features most of the artifacts relating to the salt mining history of the site. The path continues and connects to a final volume, which is enclosed by a larger viewing platform, connects to a ramp that brings visitors down to the water's edge. These sections cut through each volume, exposing the geometry of the roof and skylights and showing how one side of the proposal is more embedded in the land while the other is more exposed. So here they are individually. And this lateral section perspective looks towards the water, which is hidden by the cut of the land here. But in the middle specifically, you can see the shift in scale of the walls as it transitions from the compressed space to a more open space. And then this section cuts through the mine shaft and also exposes this embedded ramp system that is intended to be somewhat embedded in the landscape. And then this view shows how someone could interact with the mine shaft, and also exposes a bit of materiality that was explored. And this view emphasizes more materiality, featuring a salt wall in the back, wood on this side, and then gently pigmented concrete. Also featuring the 4 Audubon Birds of America books that are on exhibit adjacent to the reading room. Moving forward, I think the physical model best represents the proposal's relationship with topography. So this is a plan with the roof off. And then with the roof on, this shows the entrance to the path. So you can see this compressed space that opens up where you see light in the distance. And then this is from the front, sort of from the water, I guess. And then these are just plan views of each individual volume. Here you can see the mine shaft. And then this last one shows the ramp specifically. And then I'm going to end with this diagram, which ties it all back together. You can see the abstracted layers of the salt mine connected to the surface, intersecting with this rail line pathway. Thank you for your time. If you like, I put numbers so you can like tell me where to go if we need to go anywhere specifically.
I have a small question. That was a nice presentation. Thank you. How deep is the mine shaft?
I mean, from what I understand, it extended 1,500 feet into the salt dome. So it's like pretty, like I was saying, the scale of conditions below the ground are massive in comparison to what's on the surface, which I think is really impressive.
It's fantastic. I mean, I love this thing. I mean, even your last comment about the scale, the differential of scale between like kind of our normative day-to-day experience and then like 1,500 feet of vertical mine shaft into like a salt dome. I mean, I don't even have a way to comprehend what that is. But what fascinates me about that in some ways is almost like if you've ever read Voltaire's Micromegas, you know, like two radically different scales of being running around the universe, looking at like phenomena. You might get a kick out of that book. But
Okay.
I love the drawings. I love the section. The site section to me is sort of the key. You know, it sort of sets the whole tone for the project. I love the diagram that you ended with as well. I think it works with the spirit of that kind of drawing. But it's also very informative, I think. I mean, I would probably need a few more layers of maybe notation personally to sort of understand it. But I think as a graphic and as a suggestion of intuition or logic, I think it's very palpable. Two kind of things that I think about just in terms of the design, the zigzaggy ramp sort of unfortunately really kind of cripples the project for me, where I can't see past that. And when I was a student, one of the ways that I was taught to look at my own work was try to understand what the dominant presencing characteristics are. And so that's the thing that immediately jumps out visually. And it doesn't seem to convey the real attitude of the project in any meaningful way. And I think that could be either streamlined or gotten rid of almost entirely, because I think it sort of divorces the project from the real significance of some of the more deliberate and articulate moves. In particular, the really clear sort of organizing line of the bar, and then these sort of idiosyncratically organized boxes and volumes sort of cast along that organizing bar. And then lastly, I guess, the one thing that I would maybe suggest changing, if you go to drawing number, where is it? It's the axon. I guess it's number 5 or something. Yeah, that one. If you zoom in on that a little bit, I wish the exterior of the building exposed the shaft. It seems like you could make that a formal move that sort of gives this hint of the competing geometry of the cylinder. and then from the exterior, and you could make that either a set of kind of light guardrails if you have to think about guardrails, but or you just expose the cylinder from the exterior, and it's sort of this excavated formal move from the outside. I guess I'm bringing up my Booleaning fetishes or obsessions from my past, but anyway, I think that would be a neat way to sort of articulate the shaft from the exterior of the building.
I think your concept drawing was really clear. Can you go to that drawing?
Yeah.
Number 24, helpfully
Yes.
numbered. I think it's a nice project as well. You know, the concept drawing, the shaft is green in the concept drawing. Is that right?
The void where the shaft is, yeah.
It's green. That's the shaft. Yeah, I think that the for me, these rotated grid, you're extracting a project from these rotated grids and the shaft, which for me becomes almost like a kind of hinge in the project, or a kind of pivot point where the geometries like turn around in your plan making. And there's something a little bit, go back to one of your plans or an image where we can actually see the architecture, including the shaft. There's something about the way the shaft's included that's a little bit too casual. You know, there's a funny image you have of like a man just like looking down as though he's like looking at pennies in one of those things in the mall that you like drop pennies into. I mean, it's really this pretty significant, like metaphysically, but also like, you know, graphically, this kind of hinge in the project that for me, I like the way in which you're extracting these grids, that it's turning around the shaft, the articulation of the project's quite beautiful, but I feel like you could really, I don't know, if you could deal with the presence of that artifact in a little bit more precious way, maybe you're not trying to be too precious with it, but I think it would really help help you order the kind of hierarchies and the kind of thinking of the project. And I imagine like almost every drawing would have to have like that shaft, Ben or Carrie or Nemette could tell you all kinds of ways they could probably do it graphically. But you know, the graphics of that, it would need to like kind of always read in the drawings, but maybe even without the graphics and the architecture, it would like kind of always read that relationship between what's happening in the horizontal surface and that hinge down. I think it's a really poetic, but also what's nice about it is when you have a poetic idea, that's also, I think, a helpful kind of formal organizer for you in the project. I think it's also a helpful formal organizer if you really could figure out maybe how to emphasize a little more.
Can you explain what you mean by precious?
Make it more precious? Well, right now it's jammed up against, I mean, I like your project, so just I'm trying to speak fast because of the time.
Yeah, no,
that's about to cut me off. But right now it's jammed up in that corner. You can't even walk all the way around it. And then it's got like weird leftover spaces between like the box and the edge of the circle. It's not quite like on axis with your main axis that runs left to right on the page. It's like off of that axis, but like, why is it like not tangent to that axis? It's not centered to that axis. Like, I think there's some smart gestures that you're making. So I'm really getting into the weeds with you on your project because I like it, but that's what I mean by precious. Like if I knew exactly why that dot, you know, was tangential to the cross axis and then allowing you to like make that turn, if it had a particularly like special kind of like space in which you could move around. That's what I mean about a little bit more precious. I don't know exactly what you would do. That's your design, but I feel like right now there's a casualness to how it's like organized in the plan that I can't quite get my head around. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the casualness.
Yeah.
Okay,
like,
yeah,
I'll
that
pick
makes
up
sense.
on.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
I think there's like two ways to like, I think precious is different than prominence. Because precious implies like it doesn't need to have an kind of apparent presence, like, right? Like the thing that was going on in my head is like, actually, do you architecturalize it as a kind of column or like as a totem that like begins to become a marker in the park? But that's not precious. That's not precious. That's just prominence. But something that's precious, we can experience it in scarcity, right? Like it doesn't need to be prominent, but it still holds an incredible value, right? So I think that's an interesting a dialogue. I don't yet know like what the solution is, but I think that's like an interesting question to chew on. My comments to you are sort of like in response to the two primary drivers that, or like the observations that you are reacting to, the two primary observations that you're reacting to of the existing site, which was the orientations of the room and pillar of the salt mine, and then like the vastness of that scale, the depth and section. And so there's like a didacticness in the project that is present in plan and in the orientation game of these like pavilions. And then I think the one like other, like the scale could also be calibrated in the project to be like the total length of path from start to water is the length of, there's things that I think that's like a very like dumb suggestion, but I think, or maybe the length of that, like that bar, like that, like the skewer becomes somehow an echo of that distance, that depth, or somehow you're translating that into a condition in your project. Is another opportunity. But overall, Naomi, I mean, just such a strong showing all semester. This is a great culmination to a great semester. So well done. Congratulations.
Thank you.
The way I think about precious is something that's cared for. And something else that, maybe is a way to, the way to think about it is read the short story by Borges, The Aleph. And the aleph in that story is the point that contains all points. So with your interaction with the aleph, you have experienced the entirety of the universe in an instant. And that's what that moment in that project needs to be. It has to be the simultaneity of the infinite, because that's what it's forecasting in its depth. You know what I'm saying? So it becomes sublime at that moment, right? And so that's what you have to characterize. And so the perspective of the mine shaft, that view, that drawing, that does not sell it. You have to rework that sequence in the design to make that more characteristic of the effects that you're after, because there are these sort of kind of simply designed benches, and then the penny pool kind of shaft, and it's so close. You do a couple moves, and I think it's there. And I would work on that drawing in particular, and how I can identify preciousness in the plan. Okay.
I think we're picking up on a kind of post-secular attitude that's in your project, and it's kind of in the choosing of this site in general, which is this kind of elevation of the sublime, that is the sublime of the site of extraction. It's 1,500 feet underneath us. It's the sublime of these like massive chambers that you don't have access to, as like almost a new kind of religiosity or something that we're putting into an otherwise secular site. And so I'm trying to be really like unpacking my own comment, I guess, and thinking, and what you're hearing, I think in your like professor's comments, which I think are right on, is how we dance around that as architects now, knowing this legacy of like of religious architecture that also keys into these kinds of things that deal with things like axial symmetry, centrality, all the legacies of like, we spend a lot of time in architecture studying churches. I don't know if you guys have yet, but you will. But we never actually design churches anymore. We design these kinds of buildings. So how do you take that legacy that from history and from all the tools that we have to make something prominent? I think that was a nice distinction Carrie was making in architecture, and like allude to what you're trying to allude to, which is a really, really heavy stuff, but do it in a way that has some kind of a contemporary understanding of a kind of disequilibrium that we speak to when we try to situate ourselves in relation to this work. And I mean, that's why it's hard for me to answer what that is for you. I don't know, but I think it's a question in architecture that we, it's one of the things that keeps us, in the game, despite all of the challenges that it seems like you all have encountered very early in your careers over there in New Orleans, yeah.
Great. Well, I spent basically an entire year trying to study open pit mining and how to interface with it, Naomi. So I wish you all the best. I did so very unsuccessfully, I would argue, but good luck with unpacking that comment over the holiday break. You can do it. If anyone can do it, you can do it.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi.
Okay, so the critics have been incredibly generous with their time. Does anyone have, maybe if you all have like 3 minutes, any questions you have for Ben, Carrie, or Troy? Anything that you have to ask? It's a quiet bunch.
I would be curious, after being able to see the site in multiple facets, like how you would like to approach a project like this as well. Like what ideas are inspired by this site for you?
Is that mostly to me because I'm an outsider? I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did you go there, Ben?
I haven't
I
got.
mentioned to Carrie, I will say, I mentioned to everyone in that, I looked at a salt dome. I worked on a salt dome. We did a visitor center called at a place called High Island. It's about an hour and a half from Houston towards you all. And, they're really, we did a very light intervention on that site. I applaud you all because they're really difficult sites to capture what I would call this like fascination with the sublime of industry, of geology, of the kind of biodiversity that they support. They're huge problems. And we did a project with a very light touch to try to make it so you could like see more birds in a way that wouldn't hurt the birds. But I think that what I loved watching today was the fact that you all sort of fearlessly took on that problem and tried to like think of how you can make very specific responses to what are like very broad and I think like powerful site conditions. So I don't know if I could do better than any of you all.
My advice to you all, and I think Troy, you mentioned this early on, like you'll never have a site with this kind of complex and rich a history and conditions. And that's not a bad thing. I think the point is to take away from here is that all architectural projects are rooted in an existing site. And so if you are able to really what this is conditioning in a kind of extreme case or extreme sense is to build sensitivities to those existing conditions so that, when your project has far less of a history than this one does, you're able to leverage, I think, value in the existing. And for me, if you take away that, that's a real win. So I don't know yet how I would respond. And I like Troy's out that I wouldn't be able to do it any better than any of you all. But what I want you to take away from this is a care in the existing, or an acknowledgement that there is value in the existing conditions of a site that you can respond to.
Yeah, I don't know if I can. I love the question. I mean, I think it's like the right question to ask at the end of seeing 12 fantastic I think it was 12. I might be wrong, but whatever it was, 12 fantastic projects, and then oh my God, how do I do it myself, or how do I make an attempt to do what you all did? And so I mean, it was great work. I loved watching all the presentations. I loved seeing all of the work that you've done, and the quality of the drawings, I think, by and large, were really fantastic. And, that shows commitment, that shows rigor, that shows, conviction to exploring craft through your work. And that's super, super important. Regarding the site itself, I mean, I don't know. I think maybe it's my fascinations, what Troy was saying about like the secular and the sublime. I love that mashup. And there's something really, really potent and powerful to me about that, about the ways in which we recast the kind of the deep quality of experience through architecture, and in particular architectural form. And so I get really interested in the way that architectural form is able to generate deep connections, experience and place. And so, oops, sorry about the perfect timing to ruin my climax
The way
moment.
devices can dislocate us
Saved by the bell.
endlessly.
Secular sublime. But anyway, no. Yeah, I don't know. That would be probably where I would trend. I've had an ongoing fascination in some of those kinds of qualities. So congratulations to everybody, though. It's a really provocative project.
Great. Thank you so much. That was a great question, Sabrina. I was going to ask the jurors what their favorite cookie was. So yours is a little bit more relevant. Okay, so final kind of
Snickerdoodle.
Snickerdoodle, Troy.
Oh, chocolate chip.
Okay, Ben.
Molasses.
Ooh, the curveball. Great.
What about you, Nemeth? Come on.
Me, little me. You'd never ask. You know those like it's like an ice cream sandwich, but with the cookies. Is that allowed?
Wow.
Like a mega cookie. Okay. Any other kind of thoughts from the critics before you all kind of head out? And I just wanted to say really quickly, there is a lot of kind of commentary on the drawings and the quality of drawings from the jurors. That's all credit to kind of Carrie and her class in digital media.
No,
I'm just the
students.
and of course the students, but also Carrie's hard work in digital media. So I get to reap the benefits a little bit from that too in studio. Any other
The
critics?
fantastical drawing was a nice addition. I loved seeing those.
Yeah, I stole that from an old professor as well. So
the work was amazing to see as the outsider here. I have a puppy here too. You all are very it's a very exciting moment in your career. I think you're all very like fearless and talented at the same time, which can sometimes be a blessing and sometimes be a kind of a curse. But it's really amazing to see, and I just kind of want to remind you all as well, that you all have spent like 500 hours on these projects, and especially now I appear in this window for like 5 minutes and get to hear about them and have a comment. So there's an incredible like imbalance, but I can see the 500 hours in the work that you all did in this, and it's really amazing to see. To see that. And I also think it's amazing that we produced this and then you all rip it down off the virtual wall and start it again next semester too. So kind of remarkable process to participate in, especially given everything that we've all been kind of facing, and you all certainly in more intense ways than in other locales. So it's great to see the work, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Fun to review with you, Troy. And
yeah,
Ben.
hopefully we can all be in person sometime.
I know, that'd be great. You assembled a great group, Nemeth.
Well, I just got lucky with all of the fantastic people I've gotten to know over the years. Thank you all. Ben, Carrie, did you all have any kind of final thoughts before we wrap up?
I mean, this is one semester in a long career, and one of the things that I like to think about is the continuity and growth of ideas as you continue to study architecture. And so, this is, part of a long process. So you're going to be learning skills, you're going to be learning techniques, you're going to be learning ways to engage with contexts and sites and things like that. But then in your next semester, you're going to be learning a new set of skills, but don't lose sight of what you gained this term so that you can bring it forward into the next semester and keep developing what you've already begun and keep getting stronger with those assets.
Yeah, and these guys have already heard too much from me all semester, so I'm just going to let them have some relief from me.
All right. Well, thank you all for spending your afternoon and early evening with us. We really appreciate it. So round of applause for the students and for the critics. Thank you all so much. The students are going to hang back, but thank you so much, Troy, Carrie, and Dunn for
And round of applause for Nanette too, of course.
Yeah.
So
I
you're very
didn't
lucky
say
to have
that.
her. Yeah.
I included that in my email to him.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so
All right.
much.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Everybody.
Bye. All right. So I think what we need to do, because we're still on YouTube, we might all have to log out and then log back in if everyone's okay with that. And we'll spend like 5 minutes just catching up. Okay. Thanks so much.